Just by the way, Ryan McLawley, I'm pretty sure Ryan McLawley calls himself a moderate. I don't even think he calls himself a conservative. Every single time there's a conservative who is too afraid or ashamed of the fact that they're a conservative, they'll just call themselves a moderate. And this is why you should never appeal to moderates, because you're just trying to appeal to self-hating Republicans. Why? There's no point to appealing to moderates when all of them are self-hating Republicans, right? They hate themselves, they hate their lives, they hate their wife, they hate their positions. All of their positions is born from personal disagreements and personal fucking spite. So, like, the fact that people call themselves moderates is laughable, because after 10 years of Trump, if you're still calling yourself a moderate, you're probably a cuck.
Ironically, in the name of progress, the progressives are moving away from the moral foundation that was what we had all our progress as a nation built on. When Lincoln debated Douglas about slavery, he invoked natural rights as his argument for why slavery was wrong. Ditto Frederick Douglass, ditto Martin Luther King Jr. This is our moral foundation. This is how we've accomplished all we did as a nation. But now, today, it's not good enough. Now equality needs to be abandoned in favor of equity. Now we need the government to ensure equality of outcome rather than preserve our natural rights. This is not a subtle change.
Is that like so bad? Is equity like so bad? If we want to make sure that everyone is in the same place in life, is that really such a horrible proposition? It is, yeah.
It's an obvious change. It's a self-evident change, to use the words of our founders, and one that many people intuit. And even if they can't put words on them, it disquiets them. It makes them feel like something has gone deeply wrong. And I would posit it's why the left has been so broadly unpopular of late.
Oh yeah, no, you know what? Nah, fuck both of these people. Like Ryan McLawley, I dislike, but do you know who I dislike more than Ryan McLawley? I hate Gen Z attorney. This motherfucker is the bane of my very existence, okay? This guy actually like hurts my soul. At first I thought that Gen Z attorney was gonna be like a good faith interlocutor, but this guy is like he voted 3 times for Trump. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say, is that he voted 3 times for Trump and calls himself a moderate. He voted 3 times for Trump and he calls himself a moderate, okay? They're both practicing lawyers. Fuck both of these people. These guys are the worst snakes, okay? These guys are filth, all right? Like, just actual filth.
Because this is such a clear point, I suspect my opponents will struggle, and I say opponents, these are friends, so my friends on the other side, I should say, but I think they're going to struggle to discredit that proposition. So instead, I suspect most of our conversation is going to be about.
Also, the moment that both of these two get heated, what I kind of notice is that if you're from like an upper class upbringing or a middle to upper class upbringing, typically the way that you act is that you act even more condescending, right? You act even more condescending. You act even more like a dick. You act with like passive aggressiveness. It is like, I would actually prefer it if people started screaming, but no, you have to be as smug and condescending as possible, because yeah, it's so cringe, dude. Like, it's so clear to me that like these people who are attorneys, like, they view everyone around them with disdain. They view everyone around them like as a lesser being with less moral consideration. Not that there's anything wrong with viewing someone with less moral consideration, but it's just like
fighting over definitions, irrelevant whataboutisms about Trump or MAGA, because truthfully, nothing you can say about the right has any bearing on the proposition we're debating tonight, which is purely about the left. Or the always classic maneuver, moving the goalposts and saying, yes, it's happening, but in fact, it is a good thing. So I think with that, I'll leave it to my colleagues, and I think we'll work through this argument quickly and easily tonight because it's so obviously true.
Thank you, Ryan. And Gen Z attorney, to you, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for having me. My name's Scott, or Scotty O, aka the Gen Z attorney, and me and Ryan, we actually are working on our own project together. We've got a podcast called the Ordered Liberty Podcast, where we talk about all these types of issues, streaming Sunday nights, 8 o'clock on both of our channels. But funnily enough, aside from that, we did not actually coordinate anything tonight other than the thing Ryan brought up about this conversation really has to focus on the left. That's the only thing we said ahead of time. We came in with matching fits, and he basically ripped my entire opening statement that I spent the last 2 hours putting together. So it's unfortunate, but you pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything. That America is a moral propositional nation, and is exactly right. It's the Declaration of Independence that lays out that moral proposition. And I actually got the quote he just read out broken down into separate points. We'll go through that in depth as we go on. I'll expand it, though, with the Constitution is the codification. It's more of a legalistic document, but it is the codification of the moral foundation. And the Federalist Papers are the argument for why we should codify this moral principle. So I'll be referring back to those 3 kind of throughout the night as we establish, right, what is the moral proposition. But in that vein, though, I kind of had a few main takeaways as to how we define this moral proposition. First, it is that rights are God-given and they do pre-exist government instead of coming from the government. It's this idea of negative rights, not positive rights. Second, beyond that, main rights are, of course, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I'm including property in there, of course. That's the John Locke, Adam Smith original saying, life, liberty, and property. Jefferson changed it in the Declaration, but changed it to a more expansive term that you can argue encompasses property. But in that sense, the Constitution is rife with recognitions that property rights are fundamental to the American structure. And there has to be a strong protection of private property and a robust free market surrounding that. Beyond that, it is justice is actually a quote from Federalist 51. Justice is the end.
I still don't quite get what they believe though. Like they're saying a bunch of like stupid bullshit, right? But like this just seems like jargon talk, right? Like this just seems like filler words to me. But you know, maybe they'll like say something different that might change their mind.
It is the end of civil society.
We'll see.
And
We'll see.
meaning,
Okay.
the destruction, and meaning it is the purpose of a civil society. And the moral proposition
like this is like this is like words that you say in order to fill in like the missing part of an essay. Like you're trying to reach the word limit on a fucking essay, so you put in all of these like jargonized like statements and slogans. And oh my god, like I wish people would put more facts into their opening statements. Otherwise there's just no point in putting forward their opening statements, right? Like this is why I kind of like Steven's opening statements a lot more. It's like, oh, typically when I'm talking about politics, I'm frustrated by X and Y, and the reason why is because of X, because of Z fallacy, and because lists off a bunch of statistics and facts and goes like, however, but people understand it from this perspective of blah 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 blah, right? Very concise. Like he keeps it short. Whatever, you're good, you're done, right? That's it. Yeah,
individual justice, that it is a country of laws, not a country of men, that has to reign supreme. So individual justice. And finally, that men are not angels, and therefore the checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism are necessary and mandatory under the style of governance. I would argue the left has abandoned these principles by saying that a belief that God has no place at all in, first, that really God doesn't exist, and or has no
even while talking fast,
place at all in society.
I think everyone needs to learn at some point how to talk concisely rather than talk with like stop sounding like an essay, basically, right? I mean, not that lawyers can help themselves, but it's better if you put things in a more concise manner than it is putting it in a very thick and stewy manner, churning, you know?
Separationist view of the left wing of judicial interpretation. Belief that rights come from the government, not from God, and that these rights are positive rights. Think rights to food, rights to housing, rights to healthcare, as we hear our friends on the left advocating for. Not a huge fan of property rights on the left, between Marxism, socialism, communism, calling to abolish private property, constantly campaigning against the 1% and wealth taxes and abolishing billionaires and whatnot, and really just the constant railing against capitalism. Social justice reigns supreme over individual justice, and really all these types of justice you hear, whether it's climate justice.
Like, you guys realize, like, he literally just said nothing, right? Like, he literally just said, like, that was a bunch of words, but that's, like, literally nothing. Right? Like, he's saying, oh, well, people value blah, blah, rights over this rights, but you can literally define these words as any term. Like, these words have such broad definitions, and these words are such buzzwords that they mean nothing, right? It's like if someone says the trans agenda. What is the trans agenda? Are you talking about on an interpersonal basis, where someone is trying to hash out your thoughts? Are you talking about the way that doctors operate? Are you talking about, like, at some point, these terms and these words, they lose meaning. They lose a lot of meaning. They don't mean anything anymore, right? But,
social justice, cosmic justice, reproductive justice. None of that is real justice. Individual justice is the only true justice.
Sure.
And that's where the term equity comes from. And equity, I would submit that Joe Biden openly said he made a core function of his entire administration. And so it is not just the fringe 6 follower accounts on Blue Sky. This is a core tenet of the left.
It's cultural stuff, yeah.
And I think
another thing is, like, whenever people talk about they, right? The ambiguous they, but when you use the word they, that doesn't necessarily line up with the same they that other people are using, right? Because when Nazis use they are talking about the Jews. But when you use they, maybe you're talking about Republicans, or you're talking about the corrupt administration we have right now, but you're not referring to the same group of people. You're just not, right?
Leave it at that.
Unless you're Nazi-bull, all right? National Bolshevik.
But a lot more to talk about. Thank you again for having me here.
Okay, you wouldn't get that. Don't worry about it.
Gen Z Attorney on YouTube and the Gen Z Attorney on Twitter X. You're muted.
I forgot. Nanfan, to you, please, and thank you, Scott.
Sure. So I think, firstly, it is relevant that just like currently, I do see the left like fighting for principles
Ben Shapiro uses transceiver unironically is wild. Well, I mean, with Ben Shapiro, I think he's just straight up a grifter. Like, he's way too smart to not be grifting.
That I think are in line with America's founding America's moral proposition. I mean, the rule of law and checks and balances are things that I think, left-leaning law firms, for example, are fighting for in a court against. I understand this props about the left, but it is relevant. I think that it is against at least a segment of the right that is currently in power. I, of course, have issues with the belief in inalienable rights, but I think more relevant, it's sort of silly to say that just because some of the values that left-leaning people sometimes have, like, fall outside of the narrow scope of what some of the founders defined natural rights as being, that the left has holistically or therefore abandoned America's moral proposition. And in fact, I think a lot of the values like equality or some notion of positive rights being provided to people, like, I think those values are perfectly in line with the actual the sort of realization of the goals from establishing those natural rights. And that seems to be something that the American populace generally has always had some belief of. Obviously today, I think if you poll people, they would not say something like providing people with some right to healthcare is like fundamentally un-American. I imagine that's the case historically as well. That's part of the reason why we enacted welfare programs, for example, in the first place.
Thank you, Nanfan, and Pisco to you, please.
Yeah, so
Oh my god, I love it when things are short. Just like my dick. Okay, sorry.
Understand, one, the left to be people on the political left of America, as the question is understood, and that to be largely represented by the Democratic Party. I think in the context of that question, it doesn't really make sense to talk about the left differently. So that's how I understand that term to be applied in the context of the question. And I take the American moral proposition. I have to understand, tell you that that's not a phrase that I know to be like have a specific technical meaning, but I understand that as a commitment just to the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States. And I don't understand that term to be more narrow than that. I mean, it's all well and good to reference the natural rights philosophies of the.
Or maybe Ben Shapiro has always been kind of evil. Like, hasn't he done the whole shtick? Hasn't he done the whole shtick already for years? In regards to owning the libs and debating them and like letting people know how much they suck. I don't know. Like, I feel like he's been doing this since forever.
And stuff, but they were not in agreement of what those terms that they were talking about even meant, right? Like, so Ryan, for example, cites property as like, what does that mean? Does that include squatters' rights? What is a taking under the takings clause? What are the extent of those property rights? What are, like, for example, like self-defense rules with regard to property? And so it requires a commitment to institute governments to resolve these issues about what these rights or equality for law actually means. And similarly with like the term liberty, right? And when you said the Declaration of Independence, the framers were in agreement of whether we should be able to own people. Does property right extend over owning individuals? And so to the extent that there is a through line between the founding era generation and today and what the basic American moral proposition, it's not on what is the necessary entailment of the words like property or liberty, or what these rights actually mean. It's a commitment more to a structure and a process to discover the rights. For example, like the Ninth Amendment says the Constitution doesn't disparage the potential that there exist other rights outside of the document. And so basically, once you start to get more granular than that, a commitment to the Constitution and to the rule of law, you're starting to get into areas in which there was never agreement. There was vast ecclesiastical and religious differences at the time of the framing. It's not a commitment to God. That is not a basic American moral proposition that you could get more narrow on it. And so the more you try to segment it into like a particular sort of philosophy that you're advocating, a normative philosophy, you're going to get farther and farther away from the framing generation, and it's going to start to lose its universality, and therefore like the notion that it's an American moral proposition in the first place. So I don't think that God and the arguments for God are essential to the American moral proposition, and I don't think a particular view, for example, of like political and economic doctrines that didn't even exist at the framing, like Marxism and communism, and certainly not forms of socialism that have taken hold in the Democratic Party that are consistent with and provide no contradiction with some of the notions of property rights and liberty, at least as I understand those. So yeah, I think that is how I understand those terms. And on the actual proposition,
who is technically smarter, Goku or Vegeta? They're both really, they're both well regarded. Okay.
The Democratic Party has not abandoned commitment to the rule of law of the Constitution of the United States. To the contrary, they're the ones trying to uphold those basic protections and those constitutional liberties and to police them at the margins where it does become relevant whether or not the left has abandoned that proposition, the extent to which they're fighting for it. And that's why it's relevant that they're fighting MAGA, right? Like the fact that they haven't abandoned the fight against MAGA, who is in contradiction to the American moral proposition, is relevant to the evidentiary case of whether they've abandoned the American moral proposition as I understand it. So that's why it will become relevant, what they're doing in opposition to Trump, because that bears on the evidentiary case as to whether or not they are supporting the American moral proposition.
Perfect.
Oh, okay. So this was also like a fucking, it's just so many words. Oh my God. But what Pisco is essentially saying is that everyone has talked about, oh yeah, what rights people should have, the standards in which we live by, but everyone uses words in different ways. So when you use words in different ways and you have different definitions for things, even though it may seem like everyone is arguing on the same level, everyone is fundamentally defining words differently and based on what words imply. So when you're talking about something, you got to make sure everyone has the same definition as well, because otherwise you're just talking in circles. And the problem is, again, when it comes to property and stuff like that, like the definition of property has changed over time. Like one of the examples that he has given is that property can count as slaves back then as well. So yeah, as definitions evolve, so does the argument, and you can't just assume that the same argument is consistent throughout like the entire centuries or so, because definitions evolve and change over time, right? So yeah.
Thank you. And to the audience, all four of these gentlemen are streaming on their own ends. Please feel free to go like, subscribe, and share on their behalf.
What's your favorite Pringle flavor? Yes or no? No.
Pardon me. And of course, our I can't even talk tonight. Our lineup this evening, we're going to get through the debate. We will move into closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats. And then, of course, if you have something to add to this panel, we will go into open panel afterwards. Gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
I mean, I just for my own amusement, if nothing else, would like to start with the fact that all three things I predicted would happen happened instantly and in the opening statements. So that's fun. We got the definitions, we got the what about Trump, and then we got the no, we actually think it's good to move on from.
Can we stop here though? Because
quick order. If you let me just finish, I'm just warming up to a point. Because definitions are going to matter quite a lot. It seems like we should probably start there before we get into anything else.
Okay,
it's going to be hard
dude.
I hopefully we can
totally agree, Ryan. Yeah, Ryan, I totally agree with that. I just want to say it's not of note that we would be talking about meaning. If you haven't like sort of priced in meaning into the proposition, then of course it's not deceptive or wrong or how you're implying with your tone of voice there that we would be like talking about the meaning of what these terms is. To understand the proposition for the debate, we need to understand what the hell we're talking about. So the fact that you would but the fact that you would take.
Oh my god, it's already heated off the bat, dude. I'm so fucking ready, dude. See, whenever Pisco debates, it's always good entertainment. No matter if you agree or disagree with him, he'll always bring banger content, dude.
As you did, and don't try to say that you didn't from the start of the debate. Like I expect them to do. Of course, you would.
Okay, it just sounded like I glazed the fuck out of Pisco. Yes, I did.
Expect any person to try to understand the proposition by saying what we're talking about. And likewise, just because you say it's not relevant to talk about Trump, to the extent that there's an evidentiary case to talk about Trump that's related to the proposition as we understand it, of course, we're totally fine to talk about that too.
So let's do this in reverse order then, since I'd like to do definitions first, but I'm not going to let this turn into a Trump conversation. So if right now, and I don't think this is true, by the way, but if I were to concede that the right, and again, this is just for the sake of argument, if I conceded for the sake of argument that the right had abandoned America's moral proposition, how would that impact this proposition?
Because for the evidentiary case, right? So the proposition that the left has abandoned it, that will be affected, yes or no, by how much they're fighting against others who have abandoned that proposition are trying to ensconce that proposition.
Because fighting against someone who's abandoned the proposition only matters if you're fighting for the proposition. Like if the right had totally abandoned it, the left could have totally abandoned it.
No, I understand.
It's completely irrelevant to the problem.
So what I'm saying is, to the extent that evidence of the left upholding the American moral proposition is shown by them fighting on those grounds, on the specific American moral proposition against those who are not upholding and trying to undermine the American moral proposition. I'm not saying that it has to be untethered resistance to those who have abandoned, but tailored resistance on specifically the point I'm talking about, the American moral proposition, that would be relevant, wouldn't it? It's to the evidentiary case.
If you're pointing out that the left is specifically fighting for the American moral proposition, that's not about the right anymore. That's about the left. If you that's the issue. What's not the issue is how bad the right is in your estimation.
But the left's.
But I think we've made the point. I don't know.
No, I'm saying.
Well, Ryan, like you would, I think you said it before. You would agree, for example, like the ACLU. I think you consider sort of like a left-wing institution, right?
At this point, not historically, but today.
Sure, and then, like we do see examples of the ACLU and I do think it is relevant. Like they're fighting the right, they're fighting Trump by filing lawsuits, for example, on the behalf of immigrants who were deported without due process, which I think you would agree, due process is something that is relevant to
and fire too. Just to add to that, like fire, right? The fact that fire is doing a good job is informed by what? It's informed by the fact of what.
I think you should hold Ryan McLowley's like feet to the fire on this, especially on the deporting immigrants without any kind of trial, and you're trying to deport them as fast as possible, and you're like disobeying Supreme Court rulings to do so, right? I think they should be held to the fire on this. If we cannot agree that deporting anybody from the United States without any kind of due process is good or bad, if we cannot establish that as bad, there is no debate to be had, because your brain is so vegetableized, so catatonic. Okay, that makes no sense. Okay, it's so catatonic and so filled with sugar and salt, and it's the most accurate diagnosis that you can give them if they had stage 5 brain cancer or some shit. Okay, like there's no way you can't get past that. There's no way you can get past that. All right, past that point, there's just no point. Okay, that's it.
They're up against, right? So surely you're going to cite, if this were a debate about fire, this is an analogized reasoning. If this were a debate about whether fire were upholding the American moral proposition, you would obviously take into account what they're fighting against. It obviously is part of the evidentiary case. So for you to say,
Okay, they're talking pretty fast. I'm gonna slow it down a little bit, okay?
It's irrelevant. Makes no sense. Of course it's relevant.
But here's the problem, though. Here's the problem. You can't have it both ways. It can't simultaneously be that the left has not abandoned the moral proposition; they're actually upholding it, but also they have abandoned it because they have to in order to fight back against the right. So I feel like y'all's got to pick one or the other and stick with it. So
There's no contradiction there. So I do not hold that they've abandoned it because they need to fight the right. I'm saying they're upholding it, and one of the ways in which they're upholding it is by fighting the right who has abandoned it on the terms of abandonment, not on anything.
So
right?
why does it matter to bring up what the right is doing at all if you're saying the left is upholding it? Let's just focus on what the left is doing and whether or not they're actually upholding it.
What the left is doing, and part of how they're upholding it, is in resisting the right's efforts to abandon American moral proposition. And that, so the evidence that I would give to say, no, you're wrong, the left is abandoned, because look at what they're doing. Well, part of how I know what they're doing is defending the American moral proposition is to see what they're resisting. That is to say, if the right is pushing to end the American moral proposition, as I understand it, and the left is trying to prevent that from happening, then knowing what they're trying to prevent from happening.
You know, one thing that I kind of realize as more and more lawyers enter the space is that there is a lot of dumb fuck lawyers, okay? That is the reality that I have come to, is that when someone says that they are a lawyer, they're even practicing lawyer, and they have a law degree or some shit, that does not mean they're giving good takes. That does not mean they're giving any kind of informed takes. And one of the things that you sort of begin to realize is that for every single winning lawyer in court, there's always going to be a losing lawyer. This is where all the losing lawyers are, okay?
Obviously is relevant to understanding whether they've abandoned that principle. You must concede that.
That's what I'm saying.
Here's where I don't want to get derailed, and maybe we can just agree on this, and I think it'll make the debate easier. Let's take the extreme characterization of both parties, right? Let's say that the left is all communists and the right are all Nazis, right? In that universe, they are fighting each other, but they've both abandoned the American moral proposition.
Yes, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah, right. So, like, the fact that they're fighting each other doesn't matter.
But I'm not saying the mere fact of fighting.
If you want to cite examples of the fact that the left is specifically standing up for things that you believe are part of the American moral proposition, that's obviously fine because you're talking about how the left, in fact, affirms the American moral proposition. What I think is not productive and kind of frankly would just be a whataboutism in this context and derails from the debate is like lengthy discussions about what your problems with the right are, because that's quite frankly just a separate topic. Like if you and I wanted to have a debate about whether the right has abandoned American moral proposition, that would be a fun follow-up debate, but it's just not the one we're having tonight.
Ryan, I'm happy to grant that mere opposition is not enough to make the case here, is not relevant. But I'm not saying, I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that mere opposition is what makes the case. I'm saying opposition with respect to the areas in which the right is abandoning the moral proposition, and specifically to stop that is relevant. And I'll give you an example. You can grant if you think it's responsive. So, for example, if the Trump administration were doing something like, we are now collectivizing all private property in the state of whatever state, and the Democrats were trying to prevent that, right? It would be relevant to bring up what Trump was trying to do and that the Democrats are trying to prevent it, correct?
Sorry, can you say the example again?
So the example, the hypothetical, it didn't happen, but it's a hypothetical, that Trump were trying to collectivize all property in a given area or in a given industry. And that I'm trying to appeal to your sense of the American moral proposition, and pricing whatever thing that you think would be blatantly counter to that. And the Democrats were trying to stop that and prevent that from occurring for the purpose of preventing the decay of the American moral proposition. You would say it would then, therefore, be relevant to bring up what Trump was doing, correct?
Maybe. It would depend on how you phrased it, but I think we can kind of police that.
How would it be maybe?
Probably call the ball.
I think maybe I want to make sure I'm understanding, because I do see a prompt shift based on ish. But you're saying, Pisco, that the left has not abandoned; they're merely reacting to the right's abandonment.
What I'm saying, I'm not trying to change the proposition at all. What I'm saying is, what's relevant to the evidentiary case of whether it's true, in fact, that the left has abandoned the American moral proposition is the extent.
This is inherently kind of a horrible. This debate prompt. I know what Pisco is doing. I know what Pisco is doing, because if we're questioning the conduct of the left and the right-wing side of this debate is put on the offensive side will always look better versus the defensive side, right? Try it yourself, right? Try defending a position constantly and constantly trying to give excuses why your position is correct and not as bad, and see how you like it. It's not a fun time. It's not a fun time when you are constantly on the defense and you're never on the offense, right? So I know what Pisco is doing. Pisco has to reframe this debate as in, okay, what the left is doing is specifically in response to what the right is doing. So therefore, we have to talk about the bad things that the right is doing in order to see if we can justify the response on the left. Does that make sense? If yeah, I think that makes sense, right? Yeah.
To which they're fighting against the end of the American moral proposition. So if they're fighting on every ground, right, to prevent the end of the American moral proposition, then the evidentiary case that they've abandoned it is weaker. So that's why it's relevant to bring up what they're fighting against. If it is in fact connected to the American moral proposition, I would grant, obviously, that mere opposition, or if I would just said Trump is this, Trump is that, Trump is that, without mentioning the ways in which the left are trying to specifically contradict him on those areas, would be irrelevant. So I'm happy to grant that. But there are ways in which, of course, it would be relevant to bring up Trump's conduct to the extent that it bears on the American moral proposition and to the extent that the left is fighting it on those grounds.
I'm not trying to rule out the theoretical possibility that there is some example where this works out. What I'm trying to head off at the pass is this turning into just a conversation about why you think the right is bad, which is just not what the debate is about.
So I know what McLoley is doing as well. And I think they both understand the game that's being played. Oh my God, this debate is actually so interesting, like in my opinion, so far, at the very least, because it demonstrates how if you're an experienced debater and you're used to debating, and this is why like you need to practice how to debate. Because when it comes to debating, there are some things that are constantly and inherently constantly true, except for very niche scenarios. Like, for example, if you're constantly on the offense, you just naturally look better. That's it. You look better when you're on the offense, straight up. It's not even a question. You look better when you're on the offense. So therefore, the reason why McLoley wants to bring it back to bashing the left is because it would place him in a more advantageous position. So that is why he is trying to reframe things as in, okay, no, we're trying to talk about the left. All right, you said you want to talk about the left. We want to talk about the left. You agree to this debate. I want to talk about the left. Okay, I want to talk about the things that the left is doing specifically right now. But Pisco is saying, well, that's not the greater context. The greater context is that what the left is doing right now is always in response to what the right is doing, right?
I think we've kind of hashed this out sufficiently. Okay. I don't know, Sarah, if you feel like you need to give a ruling, that's fine. But I think we can probably self-police, and you can call the ball in the air if you think it needs to be called, Sarah.
I think you're.
Ryan's trying to narrow as much as possible on the thesis that the left is immoral, so there's no opposition. Yeah, but he's also trying to, yeah.
All you're tracking each other, right? Everybody understands where we're going with the conversation. I think Ryan's only fear might just be going down the Trump direction too much, or going kind of into blame the right in aspect.
I hear that. I understand that. It's just very hard to disentangle the efforts of the Democrats and the left in a context which divorces Trump. I mean, their actions are always going to be seen in like the American context, and the fact that it's the current year, the current problems, and that the fact that they're fighting against a particular administration. And so all of that will bear on like their ideas.
Yeah, and this is why, like, when you... it's so interesting to see this. Because this is where disagreements happen in terms of, oh, are we even going to be debating about the same prompt? Yeah, oh man. Like, this is the game that has to be played, right? It has to be the game that's played.
Ideology on what they want to do, on how they see the world, and it's really hard to divorce that from like the current context.
As long as you're talking about what they stand for, not merely what they stand against, I think that's interesting.
What they stand against informs what they stand for, right? Like
no, but that this is actually the heart. This is the heart of the criticism in many ways. Like part of what made me interested in this prompt is I got the sense that the Democrats were using opposition to Trump to mask a kind of civil war that was happening on the left that seems to be being won by particularly un-American ideas, but I guess we'll see how that plays out. Because they are uncomfortable articulating what they stand for. And I think like when you look at even linguistically, the shift from equality.
I've never seen Wick TV being so gotcha dishonest towards the other side. Nah, Wick is pretty biased, to be fair, right? Like Wick is pretty damn biased, right? I don't know.
Linguistically,
that is my personal belief.
Exactly what I'm talking about, which is anyone who thinks about this for even a couple seconds is going to say, well, equality means one thing. Equity must mean something else. That's why they're using that term. And, Kamala Harris put it very well. I thought she did a fair job of defining it when she said that equity is when everybody gets to the same place. But of course, if you have liberty, people will not get to the same place. If people are treated equally under law, and they have liberty, people will not get to the same place. To get people to the same place, you have to cut against liberty. You have to cut against equality. That's inherent in what it means to get everybody to the same place. So I think that when we see these terms, new terms being developed on the left, we need to ask why they're using those terms. And I think it's fair to use the definitions given by the most prominent left-wing politicians. And that does strike me as a departure from the American moral proposition as articulated in the Declaration of Independence.
We can definitely talk about that and the extent to which their ideology stands on all fours and by itself and what it means and the representations by representatives. I'm totally happy to get into that. I don't see how it bears on what we were just talking about, which is like the nature of the evidence that you bring to bear. But presumably, if this were a conversation,
I was trying to start the.
Wick says his opinion as a moderator, but he doesn't state debate topics to disarm the right from the start. I mean, we'll have to see.
Sure. Rather than to have a meta conversation.
I know. But the last note on this, and then we can move on to what you want to talk about with equity and all that stuff, is I assume if you're having a conversation about whether the right had abandoned the American moral position, it would be relevant had or had not, to talk about the extent to which the right was fighting against the left's use of equity, right? So you'd be like, look, the right wing hasn't abandoned the moral proposition because they're fighting against the Democrats who are trying to implement equity, DEI, all that stuff. And that part of your prior on whether or not the right is standing for the American moral proposition has to deal with like the evidentiary case of what they're doing, and what they're doing is going to be informed by their opposition. And so I think you would grant that would be relevant. I'm happy to move on and you know.
Just real quick on that. I think everyone can realize, obviously, none of these actions are happening inside of a vacuum. There's always going to be cause of action A, then B, then C, and it's just ping pong back and forth. So I don't think anyone is not able to comprehend that. I think the issue is, like the example you gave earlier, if you say, if Trump were to collectivize all the private property, and now we want to talk about how the Democrats are responding to that, I think that's fine as far as like, okay, there's the factual predicate.
Okay, Gen Z attorney throwing for McLoley here, okay? McLoley is like, bro, oh no, please read what I'm doing right now. Please understand what I'm doing is for the sake of both of us. And then, and then Gen Z attorney is like, don't we have to examine things in the greater context of things? Like, don't we have to examine things in the greater context of things? And then McLoley's like, dude, please, okay, please, no.
Just as like to get us to where we're talking about the less response. Like, the main concern is like, well, we need to talk about exactly why that the collectivization of that private property is just such a terrible thing. Like, I think we can all be mature enough to recognize like none of this happens in a vacuum, but the main focus of the conversation is going to be on the left, whether or not they've abandoned.
It's over.
Okay. And non-fun, I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity if you needed to chime anything in there.
It's over, dude.
I'm good for now.
Okay.
You know, I love the Pisco Ryan show, but
I'm sure it sounds like everybody's on board. We're all on the same track. Then I give it back to you.
So you want to talk about the equity thing? So that's
we can start there.
So
let's frame it first. Sorry, real quick. Let's frame it just through the Declaration of Independence. This is our foundational moral document for the country, and I think me and Ryan would both agree the whole nature and idea of equity is a stark contrast to the principles laid out inside the Declaration, which is that all men are created equal and are entitled to these inalienable rights of life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. And when you start imposing these equitable principles, which is more of a collective justice principle, that stands completely contradictory to the founding principles of individual justice. Ryan, is that a fair summation of your point as well?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think we saw.
Okay, I would love a good example of that, but
this idea percolate as ideas tend to, especially on the left, from academia and in well-sourced, famous academics who were espousing this and similar concepts. It was adopted by the Biden administration, certainly, and by the Harris when she was running, and its impact is obvious on both the language but also the policy.
Where can I find this video? It is on Pisco's channel.
Of the left, and this was, I'm not talking about like in this. I think, well, actually, it's something we might want to get into later. I'm not talking about the fringe left, though. I think the fringe left has obviously abandoned the American moral proposition. But we're talking here even on kind of like the mainstream left. These terms brought in. So to the extent that the audience is convinced that these terms are.
So I'm kind of curious if Ryan McLoley considers the mainstream left to include Fox News. Like, there's no way he would include Fox News in that, right? On whether or not Fox News in the mainstream. I mean, he could be crazy enough to consider Fox News to be a part of that. But what I'm referring to is like the Dominion lawsuit, where Fox News is a right-wing organization, but they have the Dominion lawsuit that basically says that they defamed Dominion, and they had to pay out like $1 billion for that shit. And
are in fact evidence of a departure from the American moral proposition. I think it's clear as day on the policies of the Biden administration and the Harris administration.
Yeah, at that level of granularity, the American moral.
like MSNBC and CNN can't even match up to like the beginning of what of what Fox News did, right, for Dominion voting machines.
Proposition cannot include the kind of conflict on the term equity that you're talking about.
It's not even
Because
close.
remember, it needs to persist across the temporality back to the framers, and the framers' vision of equality understood included slavery and the inclusion of having an entire class of people who weren't really people and property. So you can't get this notion of the American moral proposition that has this level of granularity on DEI and equity once you acknowledge that the framers were fine with slavery in their vision of equality. So it needs to be some level of generality greater than the specifics of what the...
Oh my god, the slavery thing is such a good example. Oh my god. The slavery thing is the reason why it's such a good example is just simply because it can just be shown to demonstrate that definitions and written papers can evolve over time. As long as you can get your opponent to concede that it evolves over time, I think you are set. Then you can argue your position from there. Because the biggest, maybe one of the biggest hurdles is to demonstrate how documents are meant to change over time, right? And that you shouldn't be interpreting things like literally from the very original like fucking text, right? Like, because that's obviously a very unreasonable standard to have, right? So instead, you should interpret things as things go on and imagine what the founders had in their minds instead, right? That's like a way better structure to go by, right? But yeah, I mean, the slavery thing can be just simply used to demonstrate that, yeah, it's a evolving text over time, and you should never assume that everything pertains to the same definition throughout time, right?
framers would have approved of and their vision of equality under the law.
But see, I have to push back hard because I don't think it's fair to just say as a blanket statement the framers were okay with slavery. I think we can all agree as students of the history, there was a clear conflict, and Jefferson actually had a clause in the Declaration denouncing slavery, but took it out as an effort to try and build a unity, to actually build a revolution. When you're fighting against the largest military superpower on the face of the earth at the time, you kind of got to get off the ground, and that's a fight. If you're interested in winning, you got to build some bridges, even with some people you're going to.
Did Madison own slaves?
I think the fact that there is disagreement between the founders on that is also evidence.
That's also evidence, correct?
No.
Yes, it is.
Wait. 1 second, Ryan. But you would agree then that's a
I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to go like, oh, well, I mean, there's disagreement among the fucking framers, right? But yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm just going to let them
distinction from just saying, well, the founders were cool with slavery, to now we're saying, well, it was a little bit, didn't some of them own slaves? Like, that's a completely different statement than they were.
They're different statements. Wait, no, they're different statements. But when I say that they were okay with slavery, they incorporated that as part of the compromise. When I say okay, I just mean that they were willing to abide a framework that allowed for and ensconced slavery. And all the major framers, or most of the major framers, either approved of that compromise or were outright slave owners. George Washington, major figure in the framing of the Constitution. It was based on, the Washingtonian view of the Constitution, I think, is understudied. Madison owned slaves. Jefferson owned slaves. So regardless of when I say okay, I just mean it was part of their compromise. And yes, they were hypocrites sometimes, and they wrote other things, but that's what I mean. And the fact that there was not a consensus there means you cannot get to the level of granularity of DEI if you can't do it with slavery. I mean, it's an absurd conclusion.
Pisco, you're misunderstanding what's meant by like an objective moral proposition. So when like the founders, particularly most of them, at least the ones who wrote the document, ascribed something called Scottish common sense moral realism, meaning, as relevant here, they believed in objective, real moral principles. So they view natural rights, natural law as real. Like it's like the laws of physics, the laws of math, the laws of nature, as they put it in the document. That's the philosophy that is espoused in that document. Now, when there's an objective moral standard, it stands to reason that people can be wrong about it. Of course they can be wrong about it. Newton was wrong about physics. He was wrong about physics a lot. He didn't know what Einstein knew. He didn't know about relativity. He doesn't know about quantum mechanics. So a lot of the stuff that Newton said is incorrect in light of our current understanding of the laws of physics, but that doesn't mean physics doesn't exist or that there's nothing there to talk about. Like there are founders who thought slavery was not like abhorrent under natural law. They were wrong. And in fact, when you look at Lincoln, let's see if I think I have a good quote here. Even like 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Oh, good one. You memorized it. Yeah, just like how we all memorized the multiplication tables back in the day. Okay, Jesus.
The Declaration of Independence. When he said, when he was arguing against Douglas, he invoked the Declaration of Independence. He invoked natural rights and natural law, especially to say that slavery was wrong. So what you see is
Washington straight up liked managing his plantation. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, right? Yeah. I mean, we don't hold the fucking framers to the same standard as we did, right? As we do today. But obviously, we can all acknowledge that at some point it's no longer okay to own slaves, right? What the fuck?
A developing understanding of what natural rights are, just like a discovery of the laws of physics. But what you see on the left with equity.
Also, by the way, did natural rights apply when they still own slaves? Is another curious thing that I'm wondering, right? Like, would you say that that existed back then as well? Like,
is a move in the wrong direction. We've already learned that individual rights are primary, but now they're trying to put collectivism on top of it. So it's very different to say that there were founders who made mistakes and they didn't know this yet versus people today who do know this and are going the wrong direction.
So there's going to be a contradiction that's going to be exposed. So I'll give you the following. So were the framers, had they abandoned the American moral proposition?
No.
No, even though they were wrong objectively, right?
People can make a mistake.
Wait, so is the answer
without abandoning the moral proposition?
Okay. So if the left, so you know where I'm going to get the contradiction. I'm about to go there. Wait, come on.
Let me answer the question, Pisco.
Hold on. I did want, because Pisco, it sounded like you had some clarification on top of that question. If you don't mind, Ryan, I'd like to at least allow him to clarify the question.
So this is where I'm going, and Ryan can answer and rebut it. So where I'm going is, if it's possible for the founders to not have abandoned the American moral position, but by just being objectively wrong about slavery, then why would the left being objectively wrong about DEI entail that they're abandoning the American moral proposition? That's what he needs to explain.
For the same reason that if...
Notice how the framers included men instead of people. Yeah, exactly. Because women are not men. Boom. That didn't make any sense.
Newton said what he said about physics. He was wrong compared to our modern day understanding, right? Which includes relativity. That's very different than if I today was saying, you know what? Screw relativity. Newtonian physics is the only way to go. We build our understanding of natural law over time. The founders didn't abandon natural law. They were wrong, or at least some of them were wrong in some cases. But what they were right about was a foundation that actually led to the abolishment of slavery throughout the Western world. So good on them for getting the main principle right, even though that took some time to develop, and in fact was the ticking time bomb, as it's been described, that led to the abolition movement. But beyond that, what you see on the left is fundamentally different because they know better. The history exists. They are actually attempting to undo the moral proposition and go backwards.
You just said it yourself. You said Jefferson knew better. You said Madison knew better. That these founders at the time that slavery was around, they knew better. They were writing that slavery was abhorrent. And so this distinction doesn't help you, because even if I were to grant that what really matters is the modern day leftist, it's not that they're building upon a foundation and making mistakes along the way, it's they're abandoning things that have already been resolved. It hasn't been resolved. This specific issue is much more modern than the one of slavery. Even if I were to grant that, it would be true of the framers, because the framers understood the arguments on slavery, and some even granted it. So you can't do this veil of ignorance thing to distinguish them.
That's completely untrue, Pisco. Like at the time of the founding, there was not even scientific consensus that the races were the same species. That came later.
No, I'm talking about slavery. Not about whether they're the same species. Like they're the framers.
Pisco, we do enslave other species. That's what pets like. That's like
we do enslave other species. Wait, what the fuck?
Understand, but what I'm saying is the framers, regardless of their scientific views about whether they're different species, the framers at the time, the ones who Jefferson himself knew enough to know that it was morally wrong to have chattel slavery of black people, regardless of whether they're different species. He knew enough then. So the veil of ignorance is not going to help you then, because they were aware of those arguments and they talked about it and they thought about it. So that's not going to distinguish the two groups. Like the point I'm making here is, if it's not enough to be morally wrong, objectively wrong about natural rights in the context of slavery and the American framers, then how could it possibly be enough to abandon the American moral proposition?
Just by the way, okay, typically when we are talking about slavery is specifically talking about the enslavement of people who are worthy of moral consideration, okay? We would never say that we are enslaving animals because animals are not worthy of moral consideration. Does that make sense? Nobody would ever say we are enslaving animals because we do not consider animals to be on the same level as moral consideration as humans. Slavery implies that there is something wrong with it implicitly, as in it is bad in all contexts. So therefore, we would never say that this would apply for a dog or something, right? We would never say, oh yeah, like a sled dog or like a work dog, like they are enslaved. We just say they are just dogs, work dogs. That's it, right? But yeah.
For the modern day leftists, if you grant that DEI is against the American moral proposition, for them to just be wrong about that in telling them having abandoned the American moral proposition, because that's a bigger error. You would agree, right? Being wrong about slavery as respect to the American moral proposition is way bigger than DEI, correct?
Gen Z, will you take that, or do you want me to take it?
I mean, I had a thought. I was going to go down, but then you ended it with a question. So, what was the question again?
So the question is, as between, so I'm granting that there are such things as objective moral values. I'm granting that, DEI, I guess, is against those.
Wait, what? Oh, I don't know why Salty like hit Camila. Okay. That was an accident. Okay.
So, for purposes of this current exchange, I'm not going to grant it later on, but for this purpose, assume that.
Wait,
Isn't
you don't grant that there's objective moral?
I don't even know what it means. I think it's incoherent as a concept.
Okay, but that
I don't think you could explain it if I pushed you on it. But let's not get into that.
we can get to that, but
Okay.
we can circle back.
Oh
That's,
no!
I don't even know what you mean by objective morality.
Okay, but that is inherently rejecting the American moral proposition.
I don't buy that.
We can circle back to it.
I don't buy that. But even putting that aside, the question is on offer is assume that DEI is against the objective morality of the American moral proposition, and assume you just granted. I think Gen Z, you would also grant slavery is against the American moral proposition. Would you grant that?
Yeah, it is.
You were banned from chat temporarily, but that seemed to be like accident.
I'm still going to object to this lumping in of, well, the framers were cool with it. The framers were okay with it. I just did a quick Google. The 55 delegates Constitutional Convention, 25 to 30 had slaves. So between slightly less than half or slightly more than half.
No, but it's part of their compromise, as part of their, whether they're individual slave owners, as part of their compromise, they accepted slavery.
But I think this is a common trope I see on the left a lot, is because there were individuals that did not uphold individually to the moral proposition. Therefore, the entire moral proposition has to be thrown out.
I'm not saying that.
Look at their. I know you're not saying that right now. I'm just saying as a critique of the left generally. But when we're looking at, we have to keep in mind the historical context and circumstance that yes, there were pragmatic compromises that were made. Like the Three-Fifths Compromise was a pragmatic compromise that actually weakened the South's power and their ability to use their slaves to gain more electoral power. We can look at that objectively in a vacuum and say that's horrible. They're saying black people are 3/5 of a person, but when you actually look at the history of it, it actually was a good compromise that helped accelerate the end of slavery. So I don't like the historical vacuum that we're operating.
I'm not trying to do that. And what I'm saying is merely being wrong about an objective moral proposition related to the American moral proposition isn't enough to know that those people are against the American moral proposition. If you would grant that those people, those framers, are.
I hate this like lawyer to lawyer communication here, okay? This shit is so retarded. I understand what they're talking about, okay? But like they constantly get into the weeds on literally everything. I fucking hate everything, dude. I hate how these lawyers are getting into my debate space and doing stupid bullshit argumentation that takes 5 seconds to explain, okay? You don't need an entire essay to talk about, oh my god, things should just be examined in a historical relativistic context or some shit like that. Bitch, dude, just argue the point, okay? And then point it out when it happens, okay? Dude, what the fuck? Bro, oh my god, dude, these lawyers going like, oh my god, here's my 13-page paper on how moral objectivity isn't a real thing. Bitch, just argue the point. Oh my god. Like, please speak in normal person. Why are you talking in lawyer talk? Lawyer talk is not real talk. It's not a universally recognized language. You are retarded. You are retarded. Oh my god.
Align with the American moral proposition, notwithstanding the fact that they made the incorrect decision on the American moral proposition at that time. I don't know if you grant that. Then how are we? Isn't that a bigger mistake, right? Didn't they make a bigger error relative to the modern day people in favor of DEI? That was my question.
Well, I mean, Pisco, I think that's actually a slightly misleading framing. There were, as Gen Z was saying, a large number of founders who were very opposed to slavery and were opposed to it at the founding. And I think if you're asking me, like, is slavery worse than equity in modern DEI? The answer is obviously yes. Is slavery worse? But the point I'm making is not that. The point I'm making is that.
No, but the equivalency isn't being drawn. What's being drawn is the concept, right? The concept that things can change over time. Yeah? the concept that things can change over time. Nobody is talking about, oh my god, nobody is talking about whether they are the same magnitude. Nobody cares.
At the time, there were a group of founders who were trying to abolish something, and it was a struggle, and it took a while, but eventually we succeeded. On the left, you see...
To be honest, I'm surprised he disavows slavery. This is where we're at now. We're surprised when people disavow slavery. I think we're cooked.
People...
God, please smite us from heaven above.
Trying to cut against natural rights. So while the framers were in an imperfect struggle to abolish slavery in the name of natural rights, the modern left is engaged in the project of eliminating natural rights. So the directionality here matters. What the framers were doing was a struggle to do the right thing morally over time. What the left is doing is struggling to impose immorality in real time.
No,
so
as relates,
I think that's a key difference.
As relates these Virginia representatives, the ones that I'm talking about, Madison, Jefferson, and Washington, they were not trying to end slavery. They were trying to preserve slavery. And many of the framers that I'm talking about as the denominator,
I would preserve it too. What, were you waiting for a just kidding?
who you would grant, put aside the framers as an overall
just kidding
metric, but you would never grant that Jefferson, because you're citing the Declaration of Independence, was against the American moral proposition. In no sense was he trying to end slavery. Jefferson didn't try to end slavery.
He was absolutely trying to end slavery. That's why his first draft of the Declaration of Independence included an admonition about slavery, and that was his preferred position. Now, did he live up to that personally? I think obviously there's things he could have done more. I think we could get into that if it's truly necessary.
Guys, just a reminder, okay, join my server, discord.gg/foodchops. Also, please subscribe to my second channel, youtube.com/channel/snack markets. You can check out the links right here, okay? They should be located right here. Please check it out, all right? But yeah, thank you guys so much for the support. Remember to follow me on all the social media accounts, all right? It would be really helpful if you guys did that. Thank you.
The point I'm making is not that the founders were perfect, or that they understood natural law perfectly, or that they lived up to it perfectly. Pisco, the point I'm making is that they were directionally attempting to learn about natural law and to create a society that abided by natural law.
No, they
Whereas
weren't.
what the left is doing is attempting to move away from natural law. So the fact that the framers were imperfect.
Wait, how is the left? What the fuck, dude? I want to smoke whatever Ryan McLolly is on. McLolly. Okay, I'm just gonna call him McLolly from now on. I want to smoke whatever Ryan McLolly is smoking, like, at all times, okay? Whatever he's smoking must be some good ass shit for him to be making these arguments. Bro, this guy is so stupid, dude. What the fuck? Bro. It's just like, oh my god, every day there's just somebody new, okay? It's
And got things wrong isn't the issue. The issue is that the left is going consciously on.
Yeah, natural law is white boys getting jobs. Oh my dude, god, look at this guy. This guy is like a fucking hamburger, like, fucking muncher. Look at this hamburger, but dude, he's so large. He's so fat. Sorry.
In the other direction on
That sounds
purpose.
horrible. I'm sorry.
That's the point.
So to the extent that Jefferson knew that it was against natural law to enslave black people, he was not moving us towards that end of eliminating and proceeding to a society without it.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I just have to jump in there because
W. Blowmaxer is wild. Bro, dude, how did bro escape from SeaWorld? Oh my god, stop. If I subscribe to your second channel, will you debate Pisco? On what specifically?
they're holding these two things
Also, I'm scared of Pisco. Pisco is better at debating than me, okay? He would destroy me.
as equivalent. You're saying that Jefferson writing the Declaration
Pisco.
and setting the
So
moral
sexy.
vision that was relied upon, but in all of the debates that were used that ultimately led to the abolition of slavery, him authoring that moral vision is equivalent to the fact that he personally owned slaves. And those things are, you just brought it, you're saying that he's abandoned it. So how can we take anything of what he says seriously?
The government that he supported, the government that he backed, and the vision that he was promoting across the country, both as a legislator, both as ultimately one of the framers, the first Secretary of State, and then President Jefferson, was fundamentally one that accepted slavery. That was his, and he was not moving our country in a direction of abandoning slavery. That's not what Jefferson is known for at all, and that's not what Jefferson did. And the whole point of doing this is, You can't take the American moral proposition like that to the level of specificity on policies regarding diversity. Because one thing you seem to implicitly understand is whatever the American moral proposition is needs to exist across our time span. It needs to exist and include the framing generation and also potentially people here, even though there are massive disagreements on the individual policy level or on defining what equity or equality or rule of law.
We're going to be stuck on this for like 50 hours, aren't we? On whether or not the Constitution and other documents and other rules from the beginning of time are like based off of a living interpretation or based off of the original rules. Like, are we just going to be stuck on this since the beginning of time? Is this where we are at now in the discourse? Oh yeah, this is just fantastic, just great stuff right here.
What these things mean. Such that it would encompass a moral difference between having slaves and not having slaves. And so any principle that is going to extend geographically and throughout time and unify these disparate groups of people needs to be at some conception broad. And that's why I understand it to be commitment to rule of law and the Constitution.
Sorry, Ryan, I gotta jump in there because I'm glad I did my research on the historical record to be as prepared as I could be. So you're just making sure I got it straight because you said a lot, which is good. You're making good arguments, but it was at Jefferson.
How can you be originalist and not think blacks are 3/8 of a person? It'll be 3/5 of a person, okay? Dehumanizer. All right. You know what? In terms of that, all right. I'm just gonna say, okay, too high then. Jesus Christ.
Was pro-slavery and did nothing
Actually, nah, forget about it.
stop the institution of slavery.
Yeah, he did nothing of significance, and he supported the Constitution, the document that, even though some rumblings of anti-federalism, but in general he supported, him and Madison supported the Constitution. Madison wrote it, and him together, they founded a party together. They in general did not push us towards ending slavery. I mean, they didn't even free their own slaves in their lifetime.
Would it then change your mind if, hypothetically, let's just assume Jefferson were to urge Congress in 1806 to pass a law banning the importation of slavery, and then Jefferson signed.
Let's just say hypothetically, theoretically, that you can spit bars better than me and fuck WAP better than me. Okay, sorry, that's stuck in my head. I'm so sorry.
That very law in 1807 to ban the importation of slavery. That doesn't count towards taking steps towards ending slavery?
No. The stopping of the importation of slavery is not a move towards ending slavery in the United States. Agree?
No, I'm going to hard disagree.
Okay, of course it's a move towards that.
He was not. So part of the reason why the framers were in favor of keeping slavery in the South is because the slavery was propping up their economy, and they were not looking to end slavery in Virginia. The importation of slavery had particular moral problems related to getting the slaves from Africa, and the ride over was a particular source of moral outrage. But they didn't have an eye. Hang on. What I'm going to say is they didn't have an eye. Jefferson didn't have an eye to ultimately ending slavery. That wasn't his aim.
Well, I think we can look at the fact that it was a march over time. It was there were the abolitionists that said no, purely has to all go all right now, and they didn't win because this is a thing. It's pretty baked in from the very beginning of the colonies, and this is not something that was just going to be cold turkey cut off. And so I think the pragmatic view was to do the march of progress, the steps over time. One of which is to.
Did bro forget that slaves had children? No. Black people just popped out of nowhere, okay?
Cut off the supply of new slaves.
No, but Jefferson's intent in doing that was not to end the institution of slavery. That wasn't his intent.
I don't know. What do you base that on?
I didn't know if you wanted to finish your thought there. It sounded like you got cut off.
Yeah, I have a hypothetical, but I want to ask, how are you so definitively concluding that banning the importation of slavery, combined with language where he's in his writings denouncing slavery, yes, he still owned them personally, and that's a contradiction. I'm agreeing with you there. But how can we match up his writing saying he's denouncing slavery with him taking a huge step towards cutting off the supply of new slaves coming in and saying, well, he didn't care about ending slavery? Like, how are you so confidently concluding that?
Because you can't point to a writing in which Jefferson is saying that, like, I'm trying right now to end the institution of slavery in the United States. Because even though he spoke out morally in his writings, and obviously it was a contradiction, there's a distinction in the minds of the framers between importation of slaves and the maintenance, because there was a particular evil associated with the importation of slaves that isn't present in their minds with the maintenance of slavery in the United States. And there were hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of slaves that they were able to, obviously they're having sex and they're having children.
Because what do you think when people say everyone needs therapy? I think that generally If you don't need therapy, then you just don't need it. There's plenty of people who go about their lives without needing therapy. However, at the same time, when somebody says, "Oh, everyone needs therapy," typically it's in a way that's like condescending on purpose. I think the best way to get someone to actually go and get therapy is by convincing them interpersonally in private. I think that when you declare outwards, you have typically an ulterior motive for saying that, like typically in a way to win an argument or in a way to condescend towards other people. But in a way, there are enough people in society that have experienced enough bad things or have enough insecurities as to need therapy. So in a way, it's kind of true, but it doesn't need to be said out loud, right? But yeah, anyway. I do say that because I do like condescension, okay? But that's just
and
me.
unborn slaves were happening. And so in no sense was the intent of Jefferson ultimately to end slavery.
This just feels like a catch-22.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure
Yeah.
the degree to which Jefferson himself, like, opposed slavery is relevant to the point overall. The point is simply like, the founders disagreed on natural law to such an extent that many of them did, to varying degrees, support slavery and not extend the supposed founding prospect or whatever to slaves, even though some of them knew, at least enough to say that it was wrong.
That is the ultimate point.
No, that's very well put, and I'm glad you said that. The issue that I have with this line, which I appreciate the tactic, Pisco, because it lets you be on the offense, but the reality here is, if you look at the directionality of history and what people think, natural law is an objective moral philosophy. You discover it over time. You get better at it. You learn more about it. One of the things we learned in the bloody arc of our history.
Nanvan has a bright future. Does he? I don't fucking know.
And it was a really tough lesson. It was a brutal lesson to learn, is that you ought to treat people as individuals. And slavery was wrong because they weren't being treated as individuals. That was not an easy lesson. It took us a long time to learn it, but that is part of natural law. My issue, and reason I bring up equity, is that having learned that lesson, having spent hundreds of years in this bloody pursuit of figuring out what's right and wrong, now the left wants to abandon it. So, I mean, if we can talk all day about the fact that it took the founders longer than maybe I would have preferred to figure this out and to reach consensus on it. The issue I'm pointing out is the modern left is abandoning that lesson, which was a hard-fought one, man. It took us a long time. I don't think we should give it up so quickly.
I don't think that they are.
But again, the point, as I understand it, like Pisco and I are saying, is that the stuff we're bringing up here is sort of evidence that the American moral prospect contains more.
I hope that Nanfan puts himself out there more. Yeah. I mean, it really depends on what he's doing. I've been fucking rating his streams pretty often these days. So yeah. I'm not saying that does anything, but I'm just saying.
More than just the sort of narrowly defined, like, natural law that is put in the Declaration of Independence. Right. It also includes, like, the Constitution.
I probably disagree with veganism, though, but
Constitutional principles that Pisco mentioned.
And to the extent that there's that being beholden and being committed to the American moral position would include such disagreement on vast subjects of such vast moral import, on interracial marriage, on slavery itself, on the prospect of equal rights for women. Right? Where does that fit in the framers? The fact that the American moral proposition, as understood by the framers, wouldn't include the vote for women. Right? That is something that I guess we're discovering now is objectively true, that women should have the vote. But the whole point is, whatever the American moral proposition contains, if you are able to be committed to the American moral proposition, notwithstanding being objectively wrong on issues of insane moral consequence, presumably to most people, then surely it would include being wrong on like DEI or something, especially because the Constitution itself contains different balances when it comes to like collective responsibility and individual rights. The fact that we have the takings clause, that lets the government eminent domain the fuck out of your private property. But clearly that's a balance that the Constitution struck that balanced individual rights and the need of the government and the collective need. So I think any kind of granularity that you're trying to impose, that a position on DEI makes it incompatible for modern day people to be committed to the American moral proposition, but a position on slavery, that it's fucking amazing to have slaves, or it's fucking amazing for women not to vote, it's fucking amazing for only landowners.
Stop right there. It's amazing to have slaves. Well,
to be able to vote, that wouldn't disqualify for the American moral proposition. You're going to have to find a way to have that through line.
Let me put it like this then, because my critique of both of you guys right now is this the analysis keeps feeling like we're trying to put it into the vacuum instead of understanding the historical circumstances at the time. What is the equivalent modern circumstances that would justify? I'm arguing the historical record. There's justification for it as far as reaching pragmatic compromises because it was what the times called for. What are the pragmatic compromises that are necessary in 2025 that would justify folks on the left embracing DEI and equity, and Joe Biden saying that equity is a centerpiece of his entire administration?
Yeah, sure.
What's the pragmatic compromise?
So even if I bought, which I don't, that this kind of equity DEI stuff is, so this is all assuming your framing of the American moral proposition, which I think is fucking stupid. Sorry, I think it's not. I think it's dumb. But
Can you expand on that? Why is it dumb?
I think it's dumb because you're trying to get more narrow and specific than commitment to the Constitution and respect for the rule of law. And anything more narrow, it fails to define the entire denominator.
This is the hollowed out American morality that you're advocating for. You're
Yes, this is the Pisco I'm here for. Okay. Oh my god, because it's fucking stupid. Oh my. Sorry.
essentially conflating law with morality. We're not talking about law, Pisco. I'm not talking about what the law requires. What I'm saying, what we're saying is that our founders had a vision of what morality is. Now, I know, for example, Nanpan, I don't mean to call you out and correct me if I'm wrong, but like Nanpan doesn't believe in natural rights. He doesn't believe that they are like are real objective things because he's a utilitarian. That's a very common view on the left. It's not an uncommon view on the left, but it's expressly rejecting American moral philosophy. I don't think you believe in natural rights, Pisco. I think you believe in a lot of other values, but I don't think you believe in natural rights. And I don't think either of you do. But I'm saying is that
I also don't believe in slavery. I also don't believe. So you can point out differences in.
Pisco, answer the question. Do you believe in natural rights?
It depends what you mean by natural rights.
No.
It depends what you mean by natural rights.
Objective moral principles that are discoverable.
I don't know what that is. I think it's incoherent. I don't think you're going to be able to define it.
Well, let's.
Natural rights is so stupid. Who the fuck, like, what the fuck is natural rights? Is this like just law by nature? Is that whoever eats the other person is like stronger than the other? If so, that's the retarded way to try to establish who is superior. Like what the fuck is natural rights? Can you give me a piece of documentation that lists what rights every single person should have? Adam Smith stuff? I don't know. But typically when people talk about like natural rights, typically it's like being applied to like from my point of view at the very least, whenever somebody talks about natural rights, like they're talking about abortion or some shit. They're trying to find some way to talk around it, to talk about abortion, where it's like, oh yeah, I have a natural right, like all like birth begins at conception, it's a natural right or whatever.
Read the Declaration. I'm going to read
Oh,
the
no,
we grant that some of the framers were natural rights philosophers. We grant that.
No, we're saying, do you agree with the proposition that is laid out in the Declaration? Just going to quote it verbatim.
Yeah.
Hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
On some reasons, what those.
It's kind of they're saying life, liberty, and pursuit. Yeah, but that means nothing. Is it like, do I have a pursuit to happiness if I oppress other people's rights? Do I have a pursuit to have like if my version of happiness is killing other people, should I pursue that happiness? So life, liberty. So okay, so maybe it doesn't apply because that would infringe upon life and liberty, right? Because you're taking away someone else's like fucking way of I don't know, doing shit, right? So okay, so what if my natural rights include like fucking burning down random ass forests? Okay, but I'm not actually trying to deprive. Like it's just so stupid. I don't know. Like what does any of this mean?
Yeah, it depends on what I understand to mean, but I agree with what I think is the substance of that, based on not what I take to be natural rights philosophy that I don't adhere to. But of course, that's not the proposition is whether I adhere to natural rights philosophy. It's what the American moral proposition is. Now, if you're saying that natural rights philosophy is the American moral proposition, that's just how you define it. I mean, you're going to get a lot of language that sounds like that from Democrats these days and from the left wing. And so you're going to have to make an empirical case that the left has abandoned natural rights philosophy to that extent, or that the right has embraced natural rights philosophy. And again, just to be 100% clear, what we're talking about, Gen Z attorney said one of the necessary conditions, or I guess one of the main ways to know that you're a part of the American moral proposition and natural rights or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. The pursuit of happiness for some people is gender transitioning. Yes, you're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
Is belief in God. And if belief in God is necessary to the American moral proposition, then we just have a different notion of what that is.
Well, what's necessary?
And I want to be clear as well. When I say I don't believe in natural rights, I simply mean I don't believe they are sort of intrinsically valuable in their own right. But like I do believe like they are very incredibly useful heuristics that should be.
That's a good question. Are you okay with people transitioning? Although to be honest, I think these two would be okay with adults transitioning. I don't think these people are okay with children transitioning. However, does children transitioning really infringe upon life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? Does that really infringe upon natural rights? Because if they're only changing themselves, if children are like condemning themselves, like are you saying maybe they don't have enough consent to do things? Like what are you like? Where do we draw the line? Right? It's just
codified in law,
Yeah, I
for
don't
example.
know.
And like, if you want to, and I do think the American moral proposition does entail like some sort of adherence to the Constitution, to these rights that we have, enshrined in law. Because I
Like Loli would fight 100% on adult transing? No fucking shot, dude. That is a crazy thing to fight on. I'm sorry, okay? Yeah. Like generally, literally everybody agrees with transitioning as a fucking adult, right? Like even the most hardcore of the most hardcore right-leaning, actually no, the most hardcore right-leaning people wouldn't agree with that. But like, yeah, generally this is not really a point that people kind of fight on.
think they are useful heuristics. I think they are
Yeah.
rights that we should all respect. I'm simply saying I don't believe they are the intrinsically valuable things in and of themselves.
Yeah, but the founders thought that these were self-evident, and what they meant by self-evident in that time period is that they meant that these were essentially that we have a moral sense and that there are objective moral facts about people, about the universe. There are objective moral laws, objective moral rights, which can be discovered by people because of our moral sense. They would have used the language like the moral laws written on our hearts. Now, it is possible to get to that position without belief in God. It is philosophically somewhat difficult. I've met people who attempt to do it, but it's a bit more complicated. But it's tricky.
So are you saying if you don't
if you believe in God,
I agree, but it seems like
if you believe in God, it's like the default state is that this is accurate. But if you don't believe in God, I don't think it's impossible for an atheist to get there, but I think it's really hard. The philosophy is difficult.
So are you saying that unless you believe in objective morality, you don't stand for the American moral proposition?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what the
Yeah,
the American moral proposition is.
I think that is
not just objective morality, but also objective morality based on natural rights.
Correct,
It can't
right?
be
Yeah,
objective.
that is the American moral proposition.
So we just have we understand those terms differently. I understand that term differently. To think, right, that we would understand the American moral proposition to be so specific to areas, I guess, of meta ethics that 99% of the American people couldn't even describe what objective morality is or objective ethics or have this kind of meta ethical discussion.
Sorry.
I think that's preposterously narrow. And it's not how I understand the American moral proposition. And I don't think most people would even be able to. You'd probably need to have some good grounding in philosophy to even be able to elaborate that. And so on that reading, given that most of the American people are ignorant of what it is the fuck you're talking about, how could you say that that's what that term means or ought to mean?
Because
maybe I'm
go
just
ahead,
I'm a philosophy scrub maybe. But when I read this declaration, and I don't see this as laying out this.
I hate it when people say that they are passionate about philosophy. Generally, when you say you're passionate about philosophy, you're passionate with the idea of looking like a smartass. Okay? You're not actually passionate about philosophy. You're passionate with the idea of looking like a smartass. All right? If you're actually passionate about philosophy, you would be exploring everything. Not just the stuff that you agree with or disagree with. Okay.
Ultra complicated, ultra nuanced framework that you have to have this great philosophical understanding to understand. No, it's a very short simplification of there are rights and they exist. They pre-exist us. They're bestowed on us by a creator. And that's why I say when the first thing I laid out was a belief in a God. I think when you read the Declaration, it literally says they're all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their creator. So I think it is a requirement as far as the
Present Sunday catching strays. I don't feel bad for
moral
him.
proposition that America is laying out, that you have to acknowledge that where these rights come from, because otherwise, then we're just devolving into sociological positivism, and just the law is just what we say. It's not something that pre-exists, which runs completely counter to the founders and all of their reliance on the Bible, reliance on Blackstone, and Scottish common law realism. Did I get that right, Ryan?
Yeah, I think the key point there is that the differentiation between an objective moral system and a subjective one in what we're talking about here is that morality is not determined by consensus. In a culturally relative moral system, right? If the people voted for slavery, then slavery would be morally good because they voted.
Anti-fans are not worth moral consideration and therefore should be doxxed. True.
Like that, the people agreed on it. In an objective moral system, there are things that are right and things that are wrong. Even if the people vote to do something immoral, it's still wrong.
Wait, why don't we grant your semantics and just say, what's your case that leftists don't believe in objective morality?
Okay, well, let's start with neither of you do, right?
Well, you agree that's not a good.
Wait,
hang on. That doesn't make your case.
You've come here to argue the proposition.
We're in the weeds on this philosophy conversations. I think objective morality is incoherent as a philosophical notion. I don't even understand what it means. But to put that aside, what's your case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
Okay, so we'll start with that. We have a panel of 4. Both people on the left don't agree.
I would put. I've not developed a super strong opinion on it, but I would put probably like 60% credence in more realism. But.
Okay, but you don't. Sorry, yeah, because you're a utilitarian.
What the fuck is moral realism? What the fuck is any of these positions even mean? Nobody knows what the fuck you're talking about. Who cares, dude? I went through and looked into like utilitarianism and welfarism and all this shit. Nowhere did I ever say, dude, moral realism. Oh my god, who cares?
But you don't. So you don't believe in natural law, but you think.
Wait, no, you could be. Wait. Sorry. Wait. Objective morality has to do with metaethics.
I literally cannot roll my eyes hard enough for this.
You could be a utilitarian and be an objective moralist.
Yeah.
So there's nothing inconsistent about him being a utilitarian and a moral realist.
Yeah, like I have a stance in independent reason, that being like the maximization of positive quality. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to drill on. Like, I think if I understand Malfon's position correctly, he is unsure, but he thinks objective morality is true. But then he, as a utilitarian, does not think that natural law is real. He thinks it's a heuristic. That's what I think. What you
So like my stance, independent reason for objective morality would be like the sort of maximization of positive quality of sentient experience. It would not be the stance, independent reason would not be natural rights.
Okay.
So what's the case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
Yeah. So I think that the case that the left doesn't believe in objective morality, in particular, doesn't believe in natural law, is that if you look at the statements of left-leaning politicians and you look at the policies they've implemented as a result, they are cutting the other way. You
can't tell their meta-ethical position by their positions on issues.
Of course.
How can you tell their meta-ethical position by looking at their issues?
Okay, so here's Senator Tim Kaine before the Senate. The statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our government.
I thought we were gonna argue on the facts, not like I have a stupid philosophy debate, dude. Are people who enjoy locale content considered anti-fans? Anti-fans of the locale? Yeah. I don't think anybody would ever blame locales for doxing the people who are constantly harassing them everywhere they go, right? Like, for example, if fucking Christian doxes like one of these motherfuckers that follow Christian around, like nobody would blame Christian for doing it. I'm sorry, they have the moral justification to do so. Go for it, buddy. You may not like my position. You may not even consider Christian to be a person, but I'm consistent in my morals, okay? Never question my morals. I am consistent. I am a consistency motherfucker. Okay?
Is extremely troubling. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator. That's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baas, Jews, Christians.
Let's talk about rights, not objective morality. It doesn't say.
Wait. Natural law is a more specific claim than objective rights.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you. So first, I'm going to ask you: do you have a case? It's okay if you don't have a case, and maybe it's more specific than natural rights. Do you have a case the left doesn't believe in objective morality?
I don't think that's the case we're making. No.
Okay. So natural law, which to you means what?
An objective moral truth. It is objective, discoverable moral truth.
Are you drinking? Okay. So don't tell anyone, but I've been drinking like this secret solution recently. It's a little bit embarrassing, okay? I think they call it water. They call it water. It's pretty crazy. I know.
About humans and human natures.
Objective. Okay, that sounds like it's grounded back down to objective morality.
No, because in non-FON's system, there are no laws. Like a utilitarian, like for example, I'm not trying to pick on you, non-FON, but to a utilitarian, for example, if you said, if we abolished the right to property, in fact, this came up in my debate with the Convoy. If we abolished the right to property, but I could make an empirical case that everyone would be happier and their lives would be better, and they would just be like smiling in sunshines. And basically, I could guarantee that utility would increase by abolishing property. They would do it for the right to property.
That's his normative ethical view, not his meta-ethical view. So he could be a utilitarian and be an objective moralist.
Yeah, but again, he's not a natural rights theorist.
I know, but you grounded down natural rights into objective morality, and so it's circular. You're saying that the natural rights is objective.
A natural rights theorist would say you have a right to property. The utility is irrelevant to me. Like the fact that you're trying to abolish property is morally wrong. Flat stop. It is against natural law. Therefore, we ought not do it, regardless of the outcome.
It sounds like what you're suggesting is that utilitarianism is counter to natural rights philosophy, some kind of like
yes.
Okay, but then it just sounds like it's excising the objectiveness of it. That the meta-ethical
utilitarianism is a school of objective philosophy.
Did you say on Kevin's bathtub HRT Discord? It's probably not good when you're trying to brew HRT by yourself, unless you actually know what you're doing and or is trustworthy. But But there are people who are trying to fucking brew Ozempic for themselves, and they seem to be doing fine, or not. So you know what? Do it at your own risk. Okay, just don't try to fucking bring other people into it, especially vulnerable people. Okay.
Philosophy that is wrong, and natural law is a theory of objective moral philosophy that is correct. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
Like they're both within the same umbrella term of objective moral philosophies. One is just wrong and the other is right. But it's the fact that he's within the same umbrella framework doesn't mean that I'm not going to quibble about that.
Okay, but then I don't understand. Like, you could take a threshold utilitarian view or some kind of rule utilitarian view that recognizes rights or like a threshold deontological view, and the framers would all understand that, right? Like the framers would understand that, for example, in the takings clause, that when there's particular need arises, you can take people's property. When particular need arises, you can draft them into the military. When particular needs arises, you can, fucking go lower on rights. And so any kind of view of that utilitarianism or some kind of threshold system, deontological system, is incompatible with natural rights, would just you just face and crash in that the framers all understood that sometimes governments needed to intrude on rights, if for no other reason, right? Like the Declaration of Independence, they were willing to abide a lot of rights infringements from the king. It wasn't until it reached a certain threshold that they said no. So yeah, I think anything that you're going to say that like a threshold normative view is incompatible with natural rights is going to run into the practice and belief of the framers, which was to establish systems to bring back rights in times of emergency.
Well, I think we're getting kind of afield of the prompt. I want to try and narrow this in. Specific question. So obviously we've read the Declaration. I'm not going to read the passage again, but I think we can all agree, according to the founders, that our rights they pre-exist government and they come from God. We all agree that's at least what they were saying, right?
Yeah, the framers had a bunch of beliefs, some of which we agree with, and some of which we don't.
Okay, and so, but now we're saying that. Well, let me just ask this: if rights don't come from a creator, for you guys, you two both, where do they come from?
Why is that relevant to the proposition?
Because in the moral proposition, the affirmative case that's made is that rights pre-exist government, and the government is constituted to protect those rights. They are negative rights.
Oh, no,
the
right.
Left view. Oh, wait, real quick. The modern left view is that there are a bunch of positive rights, whether it's food, housing, healthcare, anything you can name is a right now, according to the left. I made a tweet the other day. The left declares rights like Michael Scott declares bankruptcy. And so, if that's what the left is doing now, declaring all these positive rights, is that a contradiction with the founders' view of negative rights?
Wait, what's the contradiction between negative and positive rights?
Because the government is constituted to protect these inalienable negative rights, things that they're abstract. It's not a tangible physical thing. It is my right to not be killed.
No, I'm just asking what you said it was a contradiction. What is the proposition in its negation that's entailed by that view?
The office joke? Oh, yeah, that's just about the most upper class, widest thing you can reference, okay?
Yes, because a negative right, that's what I was saying. Negative right is abstract, something that just is, I have a right to not be killed. I have a right to not be stolen from, a right to not be stabbed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The right to healthcare necessarily requires that you are mandating, compelling someone else to provide a service.
When you say necessarily, you mean logically necessarily entails?
Honestly, I don't even know what the distinction is there.
Wait, so I'm asking, when you say necessarily guaranteeing...
I'm watching food shops in my garage on my iPad, and my cat is watching food shops in my bed on the TV. Oh, that's cute.
Healthcare infringes on someone's rights. I'm asking, when you say it necessarily does, you mean logically it entails it?
Directly or indirectly, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for this is maximum quibbling. He's saying that if you have a right to healthcare, the government must provide it to you, which means the government must be able to get someone to give you the healthcare.
I'm asking whether
that's not logically.
Hang on. He said that there was a contradiction. I take that to be a logical contradiction between espousing positive rights and espousing negative rights at the same time. And I'm asking what that contradiction is. And he brings up an example, which is healthcare. And he says, if you promise healthcare to people, that means that you're violating some right. I'm asking, where is that logical entailment? And does he mean that it's not logically required? And if he doesn't mean that, then there's no contradiction.
So the way I interpret this entire issue is the negative right is the right to be protected from. The positive right is the right to.
Yeah, I understand that. Yes.
Something.
Okay.
And I'm saying that is a contradiction.
What's the contradiction?
Hold on. Let him finish. Go ahead.
I guess the really best way I can explain it is that if you're providing an affirmative right to something, what if no one wants to give it? How do you then provide that right?
That's a question. That's not a contradiction. I'm asking you what the contradiction is.
I'm saying the answer to that question is the contradiction. You have to compel it. I don't have to be compelled to not be killed.
Yeah, so if I give you a possibility in which where it's all voluntary, then there's no rights violation, correct? So there's no necessary contradiction, correct?
If you can create that system, is that a real system that's going to get created, though?
I'm asking what the contradiction is, and I'm asking, in that example, there would not be any kind of right separation, correct?
In a hypothetical, that's possible.
Yes. So when you say there's a contradiction, that's incorrect, right?
No, I'm still going to disagree because I'm not going to grant a hypothetical that's impossible to exist. It's
impossible to guarantee a healthcare right where all the transactions by which the government guarantees healthcare are voluntary. That's impossible.
Yeah, I would say so.
What's the logical contradiction
I
entailed by that world?
I think we're getting bogged down.
Wait, when you
My
say it's
question to
impossible, do you
you-
mean it's logically impossible?
we can go down.
Well, you use these words like contradiction, and it's I'm like, what's the contradiction? And you're mad that I'm like following down this lines because there's no contradiction. You could hold to negative rights and positive rights. There's no contradiction there.
My question was, where do rights come from? I'm asking.
No, why is that relevant? Why is that relevant?
I don't understand what these two are trying to argue. Yeah, sure. So, so Gen Z Attorney and McLoley are like the original debate prompt. Just FYI, the original debate prompt has nothing to do with this. These people are fundamentally arguing a different issue now. So the original debate prompt was, okay, is the left like extreme, like they're going too far or whatever the fuck, right? However, the reason why talking about rights is relevant is also because, okay, they also fucking sidetracked a lot. But the reason why this is relevant is because you know what? Brain fart, okay? That's what it is, okay? I have no fucking idea, all right? That's what, okay? Fuck this shit. Nah, just kidding. No. So it started with McLoley talking about how we should only talk about the actions that the left is doing because this is a debate on how the left has gone too far. However, Pisco wants to reframe this debate in another light. He wants to reframe this as in, oh, the left is simply just reacting to the right's misdeeds. You have to look at things in the greater context. And the reason why all of this rights shit is brought up because everyone is talking about the original definitions of words and terms, and this goes back to rights, right? Because if the right is infringing upon other people's rights, according to Pisco, but according to McLoley, the right is not infringing upon people's rights, or they're not infringing on rights as much as other people, then therefore you can argue one way or another. So in a way, the definition is all that matters here, or the way that you kind of perceive things. Basically, the disagreement is, okay, is it the case that you perceive that definitions and terms and different things and like all of these terms can change, or do you perceive it in such a way where you don't view these things as ever changing, right? Because if you don't view these things as ever changing, I don't know, it's just a bunch of stupid bullshit. Okay, they actually just went far off the original debate prompt, because the original debate prompt was about whether or not the left has gone too far. I will say that, you know, Sarah's not really doing a good job at like fucking bringing them back to the original topic. I will say that part at the very least, because now they're just simply being pedantic and stupid. But it's just like the rest of this doesn't really matter as much, to be honest. If you have to ask for my opinion,
The proposition,
No,
our belief.
it's deeply relevant because when you,
Hold on.
if you, okay, sorry, Nonfon, I'll interrupt you. Go ahead.
No.
Just for Gen Z, I want to be clear. Like, you know, for one, I think that like if pushed far enough, both of you would probably subscribe to some type of threshold position where you would say, like, you know, there would be a threshold at which some minor rights violation is acceptable in order to, you know, have some overwhelming benefit to the rest of the population or whatever.
Easily.
And secondly, I think again, like the disagreement is over what the sort of what the American moral prospect is, whether or not it's so narrow as to only include God-given inalienable rights, which is something, as Pisco said, like I don't even think 99% of the population could like even lay out fully, you know. And I think if you push them far enough, they probably would have some utilitarian.
Yeah, of course. If
well.
there was an alien invasion, we would be okay in like restricting your right to go outside. And of course, if there were like a fucking like China invaded, you could do a bunch of stuff. Like everyone would immediately subscribe to it. So would the framers, by the way. Like just be honest.
No,
the Constitution is more of
the fact that you want a government at all, like
Right.
What you're
I want
getting
to let
at,
Ryan. Go ahead, Ryan.
what you're getting at is a distinction between like our framers' philosophy and like an ANCAP philosophy, right? So if you believe that there can be no infringement of natural rights at all, you end up being an ANCAP or an anarcho-objectivist because the government itself is an infringement. What our founders laid out in the Declaration of Independence was that natural rights ought be maximized. Infringement ought be minimized. And your Nonfon's right. That does not mean there's going to be zero infringement at all times. The very fact the government exists is itself an infringement. So I think you're correct.
I thought the level of misery failed with the dishonest framing. No, I don't think Pisco would let people get away with it. I think he's familiar enough with debating to know that like you're just not able to get away with it, right?
Nonfon. But the goal is to maximize the umbrella of natural rights for Americans. That's what the founders were talking about when they wrote the document. So the example that
the point is that
reason
like,
I started
hold on. Let Ryan finish, please.
The reason
Thank
I
you.
started with equity, and I think equity is like a good segue into like the problems that the modern left has, is that in service of equity, the left has expressly adopted policies that require not treating people as individuals. They've established quotas based off of race, based off of DEI. They've established different systems by which government.
Yeah, like if we were just talking about DEI, at least I can understand that we were talking about something that that is like measured, that can actually be measured in fact, right? Because another part of the issue of this debate is that the actual facts of whatever scenario is going to be brought up, like no one is bringing up anything solid from politics. Everyone is just going into a philosophy debate at this point. I mean, at this point, everyone is going to forget about what the original prompt was, and Sarah certainly is not helping. So
money is allocated on the basis of race, and this is something that we.
I understand the original thing where you're trying to reframe the debates so then you can get more favor on the debate, right? Like you can gain the upper advantage on the debate, but at this point, like this has just kind of devolved into incoherency. So
we would find reprehensible from the idea that you should treat people as individuals. You ought not treat them as members of groups. Yet the left is doing it on purpose now, today, in the year.
Like for example, this would be a good opportunity to bring it back to the original topic, right? Like, because now he is talking about how the left is doing things right now. If Pisco actually, or maybe Pisco, because Pisco loves to be pedantic, and he is like way too pedantic at times. It's just like, it's way too much, dude.
2020, they were doing it, not in the distant past. Right now, they were doing it, and they were doing it because there's a strain of thought that became very popular. It was championed by Ibram X. Kendi, who famously said the only remedy to past discrimination is current discrimination. Okay, and that's what the left advocated for. They're advocating for actual discrimination today, which is a clear rights violation, not in the distant past, but a rights violation that we know is wrong and shouldn't happen.
Was it a rights deprivation after the passage of the 14th Amendment when the government, many governments, were instituting a lot of these race-based policies? Was that a rights?
Is there any universe where I started talking about equity at the beginning of this conversation?
Yeah.
We've engaged in endless side quests of yours. Is there any point in this conversation where you are actually going to address the merits?
I'm addressing it, right? But no, I'm addressing whether. Wait. Whether I'm addressing whether or not.
You can do your segue later. Wait, right now, Pisco. Do you?
Because you're uncomfortable.
Part of the American moral proposition to purposefully discriminate against people on the basis of race, ethnicity, or gender.
I think it's compatible with the American moral proposition. That's what I'm. Okay,
so
wait. Let me tell you why. Wait. Can I explain why?
Hold on. Let's all woosah. All right. Okay. Was there a clarification with that,
yes,
Ryan, that you wanted to? So, I think I think my reflection is reflecting. But Ryan, I apologize. Was there a clarification to your question that you wanted to add in there before he answers?
No, I was just going to merely point out that that is precisely the problem. Pisco thinks it is in today's day and age acceptable to discriminate on the basis of these characteristics.
What a weasel piece of shit.
It's what you just said.
No. You asked whether it's consistent with the American moral proposition. I think that slavery is consistent with the American moral proposition. You have to.
You're wrong.
No, wait. So do you understand, right? Like when you say that you think it's acceptable to have racial discrimination, that is fucked up because that's not the belief I hold. You were asking me was whether it's consistent.
You voted for the party that did it.
So we're not here to discuss whether DEI is right or wrong. Do you agree with that?
Actually, we are here to discuss.
What?
Proposition.
Hold on.
It's a moral proposition. When I say that something is immoral, I'm saying it's wrong. So of course, when I point out that something is immoral, we're here to talk about if it's wrong. But what the fuck are you talking about?
Wait a second.
Hold on. And I am agreeable based on the framework of, especially based on everybody's prompts that they provided, the DEI, you had collectivism built in, the equity, so on and so forth. I am agreeable that the DEI conversation, as a side quest-ish, would be packed into that conversation.
What is absurd is the notion that this is a conversation about whether DEI is correct or incorrect. There's a phrase in the proposition, which is the American moral proposition. That is not equivalent to Pisco's overall moral look on everything. When I'm telling you that the American moral proposition would include things like slavery, would include things like segregation, would include things like denying women the right to vote, that just is an understanding of what I mean by American moral proposition. And what I mean by American moral proposition is something far, far more general than my specific.
There could be a million examples Pisco can go to without bringing it back to the pedantic shit. But like, I just hate how Pisco, like, it's not like Pisco is wrong on this specifically, right? But it's just that Pisco is stubborn and he has toxic masculinity. Like, this is the definition of like an overwhelming amount of toxic masculinity. He just won't let go on a single slight or a single topic that he feels pissed off on. And he constantly has to constantly hammer it home on. Yes, we get the point, Pisco, okay? Obviously natural law is something that's utterly retarded and makes absolutely no sense. And everyone who argues for natural law should like be fucking shamed and like fucking like criticized, right? But at the same time, like you are focusing so much on the weeds of the matter that we are going right into the weeds, like back again, and when we don't need to do that. There are plenty of modern day examples of like changing shit that we can go to without getting into the weeds of the philosophical, like fucking legal shit of the entire thing. I don't know. Like I just hate people who are way too pedantic. People who are way too pedantic are insufferable to me. Oh my god, kill me, dude. But it's not like I don't understand what they're talking about. It's just like it's just a waste of time. Like,
of course, I think slavery is wrong, but that just because I think slavery is wrong doesn't mean that I think it isn't consistent with the American moral proposition as I understand it. All that I think the American moral proposition is something else, and that is commitment to the Constitution and rule of law. That's all. And so when I say something like horrible policies are consistent with American moral proposition, like policies, for example, letting out all the criminals is consistent with American moral proposition. Getting rid of all murder laws is consistent with the American moral proposition. That just means that I have a different notion of what American moral proposition is. What you did was fucking sneaky. What you said is, well, because I took this view of the American moral proposition, which is much broader and grander, which includes things like slavery and things like segregation. Is you said, well, because you think it's consistent with this principle that you laid out, therefore Pisco's in favor of it, and therefore you're a bad person. And now you've converted the proposition, which is about the American moral proposition, to Pisco's a bad guy. Don't listen to him.
No.
Fucking sneaky rat.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
First of all, Pisco, you have said, and I think you're dead wrong about what the American moral proposition is, but you have said that the American moral proposition is all these horrible things that include slavery
Pisco about to crash out. He wasn't crashing out from the very beginning.
and segregation,
It's compatible.
et cetera, and that your moral philosophy is different.
Why does he get so mad in debates now? I think just ever since Stephen destroyed him, I think he's just never taken kindly to that. Listen, when his ego is bruised, it's just fucking over for just everybody in the whole room or in the whole like space, okay? The moment that his ego gets bruised, there is no recovering from that, okay? It's like Gigi no Ri, okay?
Different and better, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
no. Sorry. It's subsumed in it.
Has abandoned the American proposition.
I haven't abandoned that.
The American
Like ever since that debate, like I'm just saying Pisco was a happy bouncy ball, okay, before that debate. But after that debate and after that shit, he began to realize how hard being a content creator is and how difficult it is to get bombarded by all sides, okay? As someone who has been bombarded before, I understand. I don't think it was destiny. No, I think that was the marking point. I think that was literally the marking point, the turn, the way that he has talked about literally everything changed from there. Like that's the mood feels way more different now. Like when he talks about shit, like it's not even close, in my opinion. But
you fucking idiot, Ryan.
True, Hutch made him crash out and live and learn a couple days ago. Yeah, but like everything just began from there, right? Like this is just Sneeko's like fucking villain arc, right? Yeah.
No.
Well, I think this all ties back. If I can just maybe settle everyone down, and I'll just be the dumb blonde on the screen. But I think this tied back to Gen Z attorney saying that the contradiction between the negative and the positive rights, and that would also tie in with the DEI, the collectivism. We're kind of going in a lot of different realms here.
No,
But real quick.
Wait. I want to respond to what he just said. So my moral philosophy includes a dedication to the American moral proposition, but it's not an exhaustive thing, right? So like, the American moral proposition is just one component of my personal philosophy, but just the American moral proposition isn't enough to get you to good government. When I say that, I think
a Destiny debate, it's about like whether or not we should have Hassan being a part of our coalition, whether we should have lefties to be a part of our coalition, basically. And ever since then, Hutch has been on a crusade against lefties, sometimes to crazy ends, while siding with right-wingers. Meanwhile, Pisco is the exact opposite. He has been siding himself with the lefties against the moderates. So they are exactly the opposite of one another, right? Hutch is the person who appeals to moderates, and Pisco is the person who appeals to lefties. It's really as simple as that. They're both liberals. They're both hard liberals, but at the same time, like they are just fundamentally changed at this point.
That my personal morality is like preferable to one that is only dedicated to the rule of law. Yeah, I want more than that, but it's just an understanding of what these terms mean. And so when you say I've abandoned the American moral proposition, that's also sneaky. Me saying the American moral
she didn't have to call herself a dumb blonde. I mean, she's a fucking orbiter for like fucking Andrew Wilson, right? Like that space is just extremely misogynist, and it's probably like normal to denigrate yourself constantly in that space, especially when you are. What is the horny Slay the Spire game you were playing? Chaos Zero Nightmare. Oh God, what a stupid
position is not comprehensive of my entire philosophical outlook. Is just me acknowledging that my personal morality isn't the American moral proposition. They're not coextensive, and neither is yours. And so, of course, that my ethics is more than just the American moral proposition. You seem to be taking the view that the American moral proposition is whatever Ryan thinks. I don't think that. I think that it's a term, you just brought up, and I'm telling you how I understand it, but it doesn't subsume my entire moral outlook. Of course not.
Isn't the game just Slay the Spire but horny? No, what the fuck?
So you just used the word sneaky 3 times, and I have to say, I don't think either me or Ryan have done anything as sneaky as what you just said in 2 answers ago. That's why I want to jump in, but Ryan really wanted to go. Was that you attributed to us that our view is so granular that we think that slavery and Jim Crow is compatible with the American moral proposition. I don't think that. Ryan, real quick, pop quiz. Do you think that slavery and Jim Crow are compatible with the American moral proposition? Okay, yeah. So that you just snuck that in real slick there. So I don't think anything.
I don't think you understand my point there. I can respond if you want.
Sneaky.
Hold on.
Let him make his point.
No, the point isn't that you consider those things to be
done.
Oh yeah.
The point isn't that I was attributing that you thought that those things are included in the American moral proposition. The point is, in fact, the opposite, is the fact that someone could be so counter to the American moral proposition, to be in favor of something as reprehensible as slavery, and still be in support of the American moral proposition as you see it, shows you that a gross departure from the American moral proposition isn't enough to abandon it. And so why is it the case that a gross departure in the sense of slavery isn't enough to abandon it, but a gross departure in the sense of DEI, assuming that DEI is a gross departure, would be enough to abandon it? So you totally misunderstood why I brought that up. It's the exact opposite implication.
This brings me back to a question I had earlier. We pivoted away from it, but this is my same critique. I'm gonna make it again. You keep making this criticism of the founders when I'm saying it's a pragmatic compromise that was made at the time that you can be both in support of the American moral proposition and also be personally inconsistent with it. I don't think that's a hard pill to swallow at all. I think it's completely consistent with the historical record. I've yet to hear from you how the modern the people that we're saying things like equity. Once again, Joe Biden placing at the center of his administration, openly saying so. Equity will run through everything that he does. What is the pragmatic compromise of the evolution of understanding that would justify that flagrant opposition?
So you're basically saying like they had an excuse, right? The founders had an excuse that it was pragmatically needed at the time, and so that distinguishes the modern day people who don't have a pragmatic excuse.
It's so much simpler than that. Abolishing.
Wait a second. Let me finish. So no,
it's good. We've done this like fucking 5 times. We've done this.
We're not getting it.
Okay, interrupt me. Go.
Yeah. It is obviously different.
After talking to Prime, I hope Pisco has learned that lefties are hopeless. No, I think Pisco is a really stubborn person. I think that as long as his ego is on the line, he'll never concede to a position. Like he could talk to Prime like 100 times, and he could debate Prime 1,000 times, but he'll never ever tell Destiny that he is right, because he never ever concedes. He is like die on every single pedantic hill. Yeah. Half his fan base are lefties. He's already cooked. Yeah. I mean, I love Pisco. Okay. I do genuinely like Pisco, and Zip has convinced me that Pisco is actually a good person. Just mainly because of various reasons. Okay. But at the same time, like Pisco is super cooked. I don't know.
To attempt to abolish slavery, even if it takes a long time, even if it's imperfect, even if I wish it would have gone faster, but that movement,
basically didn't even show up.
Directionality towards abolishing slavery is very different than if somebody tried to institute slavery today. It's much worse if you tried to do it today, because we've already learned this lesson. We've already learned this moral truth that slavery is wrong. The problem, as I explained earlier, with the modern left and the equity movement is that we've learned we have an obligation to treat each other as individuals, and the left is now treating people on the basis of group identity. And they're doing it openly, and they're trying to institute it into law. So yes, that is a huge problem. I've noticed you've never defended it, because it's a tough fucking thing to defend. But if you'd like to defend it, now is your opportunity to do so.
So is the proposition, is DI right or wrong under my lights? Do you understand that to be? So why would it be? Why would it be?
Being a content creator with that sensitive ego is not great. I like seeing Pisco at his best, but sometimes gotta take that L. Pisco is cool. Okay, he's a cool person. All right, he is smart. He is charismatic. He is good looking. Okay, however, with every single tragic character, there has to be a major flaw. Okay, Pisco's major flaw is his ego, okay? And his ego brings him his downfall. And that is ultimately Pisco's greatest flaw, okay? But yeah. You can genuinely believe that Pisco is a bad person. I thought he was a bad person during that entire arc with Destiny. I genuinely thought so. The fact that he lied to Destiny's face about Straight Array being a communist, that's a fucking, that's a bad person vibe. Period. That's bad person vibes. Absolutely, for sure. Yeah. The fact that you want someone to go through the dehumanizing trouble of getting shit for you so then you can watch them dig up the clips and shit is evil behavior. That's unironically evil behavior. But I think that good people can have evil behavior, right? Anyway.
Relevant. Wait. Let me respond to that. So Ryan wants to dodge the proposition of the debate, which is whether the left has abandoned the American moral proposition, and turn this into debate whether under Pisco, under your lights, would you defend DEI? But that's not the proposition of the debate, and I'm going to now watch you twist yourself in a pretzel to discuss why my ethical outlook on DEI is relevant to the proposition. Go.
Well, no, you've already said that you disagree with the American moral proposition. But
no, I didn't. Wait. No, I fucking didn't, you liar.
Let's hold steady and say, let's assume, for the sake of this question, that I'm right about what the American moral proposition is. That my definition is the correct.
I don't even know what it means for a definition to be correct. What do you mean by that?
The moral proposition.
What do you mean by definition to be correct? I don't know what you mean when you say assume my definition is correct.
True. It is the correct.
How can definitions be true? Definitions are not propositions. Definitions are not truth apt. A definition is not truth apt.
Hold up. So it's okay to accept for purposes of moving.
Dude, he's just so angry. Pisco is correct, okay? Pisco is correct, but I think he's just a broken man now. He's no longer smug, because before, if you guys recall, he was just only smug. He was smug, okay? He was smug. He was not angry. He was smug, okay? Because for anyone that has watched any of the debates that he had with Destiny, he was smug. All right? This is not the same.
The conversation. We just accept his definition of these things and work with those words and terms.
No, I can understand your argument on your own lights and what you mean by the term, American moral proposition, but it doesn't mean that your definition is correct. I don't even understand what that means, but because I don't.
Smug is up with a shitty attitude, just comes off as bratty and belligerent.
I don't have this realist view that the objective meaning of words is there to be discovered. But if what you mean is something by American moral proposition, I've been doing that this entire time. I don't grant that what you mean is correct. I've been trying to use your own logic as an internal critique.
Okay. The question Jesus, it's pulling teeth to even get you to the point where I can ask you a question. But assuming that the version of the American proposition that Gen Z and I have presented tonight is the correct one, for the sake of argument, for the sake of this question, would equity be a rights violation, therefore wrong, under that view?
It's a tautology. You're asking if my definition is correct, which includes equity not being under natural rights, then, would it be the case? It's tautologically correct. It's trivially true that if your view is...
So you're saying, the part that I said that it's a violation is that we have a moral obligation to treat each other as individuals, not as members of groups. And you're saying that tautologically, equity is a violation of that principle.
No, taking on your view of natural rights and your view as expressive natural rights, it just follows tautologically that you're correct. You're assuming you're correct in your premise. And so you're like,
no, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
What I'm asking is, if we assume that we have a moral obligation to treat each other as individuals, which I believe is true, but I think that's true. But if we assume that's true, is the modern day...
and if that's all you assume?
If you have an obligation to treat each other as individuals, is it then wrong to discriminate on the basis of race?
Not necessarily, no, because I think under your lights, you would accept... Wait, I think I'm answering your question. Okay, I think taking your view that it's not necessarily, by necessarily I mean logically necessary, that it would entail some rights deprivation because you're committed to allowing racial discrimination in some contexts.
Oh, Pisco.
Pisco, if you have a moral obligation to treat someone as an individual, you're saying it is then acceptable to then treat them differently
on your view,
on the basis of race.
On your view, in some cases, yes. Wait, and that's why I was...
Pisco is like a Shakespearean tragedy character. Okay, that's who I believe Pisco to be. Pisco he's like a Shakespearean tragedy. Absolute cinema, okay?
You soyed out. That's why I was going to the 1860s, because on your view, you think it is acceptable sometimes, correct? Correct?
Not today.
No,
Not
wait,
today.
we'll get to that. But first, would you
No,
grant?
I'm asking you
Wait,
today.
wait. Can we just grant that in 1860 it was okay?
For what reason? Lay out your case.
Wait, for the reason of understanding your view about what equality and
Okay, please don't say slavery. Please don't say slavery. I just don't want to argue slavery. Oh my God, please, for the love of God, okay? Slavery is just, please stop, okay? He's already, to just move on from this point, please. It's not good for entertainment either, okay? Just please move on from the slavery point. Please, I'm begging you, please.
What specific example are you
So you would agree that there were race-based policies to benefit Black people post-Civil War that you would think were not rights deprivations?
Oh my God, no, we've gone back to slavery, no. You can't keep getting away with this.
Depends on which policies you're talking
So
about.
does depends mean yes, there were some?
Right,
Well,
I think he's asking for
Yeah,
clarification.
I'm asking for clarification.
No,
Which, give me a policy.
so, for example, policies of handing over property to slave owners, not fully everywhere that happened, but so former slaves, giving them disproportionately benefit through installing leaders that were specifically beneficial to Black voters.
Is this property, the property you're mentioning, is that owned by somebody else, or was it just unclaimed, unowned property?
I also feel like if part of your persona is to be this calm and collected person, well, sure, but I don't think Pisco ever presented himself to be a calm and collected person either. He's always been a more heated debater, to be fair, okay? So to be fair, he's always been a more heated debater. It's just that his demeanor, even if he's a heated debater, his demeanor has most definitely changed.
It is here's your plot of land, go.
Yeah,
I'll say
race-based
that.
policies to give freed slaves and their descendants benefits.
But that's not treating someone differently on the basis of
Integrating
race.
them into society.
That's treating them differently on the basis of the injury they suffered, which is an individual.
Okay,
Treating them
hey,
as an individual.
Also,
You're saying,
wait a
you
second.
personally were a slave. We personally give you land. That's not a group-based.
Okay, if that's not group-based discrimination, then under segregation, when those forms of persecution persisted in some fashion, same answer, right? Not discrimination.
Have you seen Destiny arguing? What do you mean? Destiny arguing? But that's Destiny. That's not Pisco.
Discrimination on the basis of race because the discrimination persisted.
Give me an example.
So, for example, forced integration in schools and busing Black kids into white.
I'm almost convinced that Destiny practices stoicism in his free time in order to come off as cool and nonchalant in debates, so that he can look like he's owning people.
And richer neighborhoods benefiting people on the basis of race, making distinctions of categories on the basis of race.
Well, what they were doing there is they were prohibiting other people
comparing
from
this to-
not
okay,
treating people
never
as
mind.
individuals.
Whatever, man.
And basically, an anti-subjugation rationale is to say
No, but
this
Pisco, if the moral principles, you ought to treat people as individuals. Segregation does not treat people as individuals. Abolishing segregation is the government stepping in to enforce the moral right that people ought to treat each other as individuals.
right. So there was discrimination, and to address that discrimination, the government instituted policies
now
that wait, policies that disproportionately benefited Black people. Correct?
It's disproportionate benefit has nothing to do.
No,
with
wait, the
anything I
intention
said.
was to help Black
No,
people, wasn't
It
it?
has nothing to do with it. The intention to benefit Black people has nothing to do with anything I've said.
I'm
What
asking-
I said is that you can't treat people differently on the basis of their.
But they
group
were,
identity.
weren't they? Wait, so I'll ask.
Destiny never comes off as overly aggressive because he's big on matching energy. Yeah, sure. I agree with that. Until it comes to his lawsuit. Then we're really not matching energy.
Is what happened in the aftermath of segregation treating Black people differently?
No, it's treating them the same.
Wait. Hang on a second. Black people were
It
given.
used to be that you had the black counter and the white counter. Now everybody gets to go to the same counter. You are making it so that everyone is being treated the same. Pisco.
Wait, no, but by addressing, hang on a second, by having policies, the policies with their explicit aim to help Black people, and policies where you were not eligible if you were a white person, or you didn't get the benefit of that if you were a white person, right? You didn't get the benefit of the state intervening to make sure that you were going to good schools when you had the forced integration on behalf of the state. That was them treating Black kids differently than white kids, correct?
It was treating them as individuals. Everyone has the same right.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Let's flash forward. Compare
Wait.
compare
Wait,
that
you have to
what
grant
Biden
it first,
did.
then we can move
Compare
on.
that to compare that to what Biden did, where you have in this era, you say, okay, it used to be the case that a store was allowed to have a black counter and a white counter. Now we're saying, no, that's illegal. You store must treat everyone as individuals. Fast forward, in the Biden administration, they had policies expressly where they said, we will not give this money to white men.
Wait a second. You have to grant.
Wait, hold on. Contend with that. Like, what do you mean? Like, they had policies like not granting into white men. What the fuck? Hello? Sorry. Maybe this is like a secret, like fucking talking point that maybe I shouldn't be bringing up or whatever the fuck, right? Because it's like a complete distraction from the overall point. But like, what the fuck do you mean? What exactly do you mean? Like, oh well, it's like white men. What? Like, what? Hello? What are you talking about?
Whether I grant a distinction or not, you have to grant the first case that they were treating black kids differently in the 1960s and for integration. They were. Obviously they were.
I think I understand.
treating them as individuals,
Maybe I can offer a translation for you, Ryan. I think because Ryan, yours is a tiered level of movement that moved along the way to get them to individuality, right? Whereas Pisco, you're piecemealing it and looking just at one time frame at a time.
I'm basically saying, I think you're tracking, Sarah. What I'm saying is, like, on his view, there are some constitutional justifications, some moral justifications.
I don't even know how I was able to track even like 70% of this debate. I can't track 100% of this debate, just mainly because it was so all over the place. It never fixated on like a single subject. Just completely and utterly messy and devoid of like direction or any kind of semblance of coherent thought in any way. But regardless, it's just I hate everything, dude.
To treat black people differently.
I'm okay.
And one of those views, we can do a more trivial one, I think, where he would grant it immediately. But one of those is to repair past discrimination, to basically to account for discrimination that occurred in the past. And I'm basically trying to get him to agree with that principle, that his view would accept, in some cases, treating black people differently abstractly to repair past discrimination. I'm trying to get him to grant that specific proposition.
Well, and I think if I may, I want to try to cool down the temperature. I think Ryan is saying because of that moral proposition originally in our foundation, in the framework, we were able to, Supreme Court, look at that and interpret and say, you know what? No, that is wrong. Let's move forward in this direction instead. So I think what he's saying is it was built in. We just weren't applying it correctly at the time.
And that's,
Maybe I could be wrong.
And that's why I'll build on that, because that's one of my main, I've said it earlier, it's one of the main tropes I see down on the left, is because there are individual failings, individual instances we can point to where the moral proposition is not being upheld. Therefore, that is now the case that, well, we should disregard the moral proposition entirely and build entire political movements around things like equity, around things like DEI, around things like institutional changes, like whether they're talking about getting rid of the filibuster, back to Supreme Court. Like, these are all justified now because we can point to, oh, well, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. And I think just because, and when we look at
I'm not doing
the
that.
historical record, look at all the debates of all the people that were pushing the society forward and trying to get everyone to.
I never knew how much I could dislike someone that shares so many political views with me until Destiny showed in my feed 6 years ago. You hate Destiny? Oh no.
The equal playing field, they kept quoting back to the moral proposition. They were saying America has set out this vision and we're not living up to it. We need to live up to it. They were not saying America was always sucked and we need to tear it all down.
No, I'm not doing that. I look up to these framers, even people like Jefferson who owned slave, and obviously Washington, these people. I'm not just trying to shit on our history and say, oh, because we were never true to our values, therefore, the values are meaningless. I'm not a fucking nihilist. I'm not doing that at all. What I'm doing is saying, on your view, abandoning the moral proposition doesn't entail having horrible views, right? Like, you could have horrible views that are in the moment in which they're held, horrible, and it doesn't entail you leaving the American moral proposition or abandoning it. And likewise, you can take the view that disproportionately treating black people better than white people in some contexts is acceptable for certain kinds of injuries, for example, past discrimination, and it doesn't entail you abandoning the American moral proposition. That is to underscore, not that we don't have like some past that is worth respecting. I think that we do. But to underscore the untenability of your position, that mere adherence to DEI means that you've abandoned the American moral proposition. If the American moral proposition can be not abandoned by holding to slavery, holding to repairing past wrongs in the context of discrimination, I don't understand why DEI raises to such a level that it entails abandoning the moral proposition. It just seems like a reductio ad absurdum.
Because it's the question I asked. I still don't think I have an answer to it.
That's
what
fine.
is the pragmatic historical context of 2020, 2025?
Oh my god. Extract VIP from Advent City. Reward Dr. Misaki. Oh my god, Misaki, where are you?
That justifies these broad government-based redress that DEI and equity is the purpose of it is redress.
What do you have to say to
So their
this?
view. So I'll respond to that. So you might disagree with this view, but I don't think you can say it's not sincerely held. Is an anti-subjugation rationale that basically we haven't done the full work of post-Reconstruction and post-segregation in eliminating these sort of emblems of discrimination, legal discrimination that existed. That we haven't done the job. We haven't finished the job of that yet. Now, I think that a lot of that is overstated. I don't agree with a lot of the fucking woke shit. I actually lost some friends in college because I was saying you should be able to wear a sombrero if you're a white guy. You know, you should be able to fucking like. I don't go full on the way, but like what I don't see is how that position, the position that like black people are still suffering under the legacy of discrimination that you would grant in the 60s, you would grant post-Reconstruction, that entails that you're abandoning the moral proposition, but like slavery, owning people at a time when people knew it was wrong, where the people who framed the Constitution knew it was wrong, that position is compatible with the American proposition as you see it, or not abandoning the American moral proposition, to be clear.
Just to see, right, and let's hopefully, I think we'll agree on this point, but in the last 10 years, when woke DEI really, became this mainstay, there's not been any sort of comparable subjugation that's happened in the last 10 years.
Agreed.
Anywhere near comparable to.
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, okay, I thought we'd agree on that.
Yeah.
So then, how it's a lot more nebulous, a lot more abstract, even given the most charitable.
Okay. All right, let's save this for later, okay? Oh, Jesus. What a crazy... I still remember the fucking... Okay. That's just...